Evelyn Carter pressed her father's last letter against her chest and did not cry. She had buried him in frozen ground with nobody standing beside her, and she had promised herself that morning she would never again need anyone to hold her upright. Then the door of her supply store swung open, and a mountain cowboy filled the frame, dust-covered, sun-darkened, carrying a letter she had never seen, and said 6 words that cracked something open inside her that she thought she had buried right alongside her father. If you're watching this story, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what this cowboy does next will stay with you long after this story ends. The summer of 1884 came to Red Willow Creek like a punishment. The creek itself had shrunk to a thin silver thread winding through cracked mud, and the mountain pines stood motionless in air so dry it made your throat ache just breathing it in. The town had already lost 2 families to the drought. Good, hard-working people who packed their wagons one morning and didn't look back. The ones who stayed did so with the grim, jaw-set stubbornness of people who had run out of anywhere else to go. Evelyn Carter was one of those people. She had taken over her father's supply store 14 months ago, the week after they put Thomas Carter in the ground, and she had not taken a single day of rest since. The store was small, barely more than 3 rooms and a back porch, but it sat on a corner lot that put it directly in the path of every miner, rancher, and trail rider coming down from the upper mountain passes. Thomas Carter had known exactly what he was doing when he built on that corner, and Evelyn had inherited both the lot and the instinct. She knew how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. She knew which miners were good for their credit, and which ones would disappear into the hills the moment their pockets filled. She kept her ledgers in a hand so neat it looked printed, and she could calculate a bulk order in her head faster than most men could find their pencils. What she could not do, what she refused to do, was smile and be grateful when the town of Red Willow Creek looked at her and saw a problem to be solved. Evelyn? Mrs. Hester Briggs appeared in the doorway that Tuesday morning, which was never a good sign. Hester Briggs was a tall woman with a long face and opinions she dispensed like medicine freely and with the absolute certainty that the recipient needed them. "I'm coming in on behalf of the Ladies' Auxiliary." "You're coming in on behalf of yourself," Evelyn said without looking up from the bolt of canvas she was measuring. "What can I get you, Mrs. Briggs?" "Nothing today, thank you. I'm here about a more pressing matter." Hester settled herself against the counter and folded her hands. "There's been talk. There's always talk. Talk about you specifically." Hester paused with the particular satisfaction of a woman who knows she is about to deliver something uncomfortable. "About a young woman of your situation running a business alone with no male guidance and the message it sends to the younger girls in this community." Evelyn set down the canvas measure very carefully. "The message," she said, "that a woman can simply refuse what God and nature intended and suffer no consequence for it." Hester's voice was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. "We're concerned for you, Evelyn. It's been over a year. Your father's gone. There are men in this town, respectable men who would be glad to take this burden from your shoulders." "The burden," Evelyn repeated. "The store, the land, the—" "Mrs. Briggs." Evelyn looked up then, and something in her expression made the older woman stop. "I'm going to ask you one time politely to take your concern and walk it back out through that door. The second time, I won't be polite." Hester Briggs drew herself up. "Well, I expected as much. Your father was a stubborn man, and I suppose the apple—" "Good morning, Mrs. Briggs." The bell above the door jangled as Hester departed, and Evelyn stood alone in the sudden quiet, her hands flat on the counter, breathing through her nose, until the anger settled into something she could carry. She was used to carrying things. That was the truth of it. The plain, unsentimental truth that she had made her peace with. You learned what you could carry, and you learned how to distribute the weight, and you kept moving. Her father had taught her that. Thomas Carter had been a small, barrel-chested man with a great laugh, and debts he never fully disclosed to his daughter until the week before he died when he'd pressed her hand between both of his and said, "The land is yours, Evelyn. Whatever you have to do, keep the land." She had kept the land. She had also taken on every cent of his debt, renegotiated the terms with the bank herself, and paid down 6 months of arrears in the 14 months since his death. She did not advertise this. She simply did it the way she did everything, quietly, efficiently, and without asking anyone for help. She wasn't going to get anyway. The morning moved along. A miner named Cord Purcell came in for pickaxe handles and paid cash, which was rare enough that she noted it in the ledger with a small sense of satisfaction. The Delacroix brothers stopped by for flour and coffee and didn't complain about the prices for once. 2 women from the newer houses on the north end browsed her fabric selection and bought nothing, but smiled at her with that particular brand of sympathy she had come to recognize, the smile that said, "Poor dear," without ever opening your mouth. She was pricing out a new order of lamp oil when the shadow fell across her doorway. She didn't hear hooves, which was strange. She always heard hooves. The street outside had a particular acoustic quality that bounced sound off the buildings and gave you a few seconds of advance warning whenever someone was riding in. But this man arrived without announcement, without noise, stepping out of the summer glare and into her doorway so quietly that one moment the doorframe was empty, and the next moment it contained a man who seemed to be made of the same material as the mountains themselves. Something ancient and weathered and too solid to be moved by ordinary forces. He was tall, not ostentatiously so, but in the way of a man who simply occupied his full height without apology, the way a fence post occupies its height. His coat was the color of old saddle leather, and his hat, a dark, broad-brimmed thing that had seen serious weather, was held in his right hand at his side, which meant he'd removed it before crossing her threshold. She noticed that immediately. Men who removed their hats in doorways were a specific kind of man. They were not always good men, but they were men who understood that certain gestures mattered. His face was burned the particular dark brown of someone who had spent years at altitude, where the sun had fewer miles of atmosphere to soften it. He had the look of a man somewhere on the older side of 30, though the outdoor years made it difficult to be precise. Dark hair cut short. Dark eyes that moved across the interior of her store with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who was in the habit of accounting for what was in a room before he started talking. He found her eyes and held them. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need volume because it trusted you to listen. "Evelyn Carter." "That's right," she said. "What can I help you with?" He reached into his coat slowly, not with any haste that might alarm her, and produced an envelope. It was old. She could see that even from across the counter. The paper had the particular yellow-brown of age, the creases worn soft from years of being folded and unfolded. He placed it on the counter. "My name is Caleb Whitmore," he said. "I ride out of the North Pass above the Sentinel Ridge line. I've been coming down to Red Willow Creek for about 2 weeks trying to find you." He paused. "Your father saved my life 11 years ago. I owe a debt and I don't leave debts unpaid. I figured you should have that letter." Evelyn did not touch the envelope. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. "My father has been dead for over a year," she said. "Yes, ma'am, I know." Something moved in his expression, not pity, which she would have resented, but something quieter than that. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I didn't know he'd passed until I came through Cedar Junction last month and heard." She looked down at the envelope again. "How did he save your life?" "Winter of '73. I was 17 years old, and I'd gotten myself into a situation above the tree line that I had no business being in. Blizzard came in fast. Your father was the only man in the valley who came looking, and he was the only man who knew those passes well enough to find me." Caleb's jaw worked for a moment. "He spent 2 days out in that storm. He didn't have to do it. He didn't know me from Adam. He stopped. He was that kind of man." Evelyn's hands were on the counter now, very still. "Yes," she said. "He was." She reached for the envelope. The letter inside was in her father's handwriting, the familiar blocky capitals he used for important things, the cursive that sloped slightly left when he was writing fast. She read the first lines and felt the floor shift subtly under her feet, the way it did when something changed the shape of a world you thought you understood. Caleb, her father, had written, "If you're reading this, I didn't make it long enough to tell you in person what I intended to tell you. There are things about the land here that you need to know. Things I haven't told Evelyn because I didn't want to scare her, and things I haven't told the town because some of these people cannot be trusted. By my count, you're the only man I know with no stake in Red Willow Creek's politics and enough integrity to handle what I'm about to tell you." The bell above the door jangled. Evelyn looked up. 3 men stood in her doorway. She knew 2 of them. Davis Karn was a squat, heavy man who worked as a kind of informal enforcer for Nathaniel Graves, the largest landowner in the valley, a man whose formal manners and expensive suits had always made Evelyn deeply uncomfortable without her being able to articulate exactly why. The second man was Yates, who went by no first name that anyone acknowledged and had flat, affectless eyes that she had always done her best not to meet. The third was a stranger, Davis. Karn looked at Evelyn, looked at Caleb, and appeared to recalculate something. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Graves sends his regards. He's been hoping to speak with you this week about the matter of your property line." "Mr. Graves knows where to find me during business hours," Evelyn said. Her voice came out steady, which she was grateful for. "As you can see, I'm with a customer." Davis Karn did not look at Caleb again. This was deliberate, the careful non-acknowledgement of a man who has decided the other person in the room is not relevant to the conversation. "Mr. Graves's surveyors have been reviewing the land records," Carney continued, "and there's some question about the eastern boundary of your property, specifically the water access. Mr. Graves has reason to believe the mountain spring on your upper acreage may fall within his holdings." "Mr. Graves is mistaken," Evelyn said. "My father held a clear deed on that spring for 19 years. Land records can be complex." Carney smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "Mr. Graves only wants to ensure everything is properly documented. He'd hate for any misunderstanding to create difficulties for you." The word difficulties hung in the air with its full weight. Evelyn set her father's letter down on the counter face down. She was about to respond, and she had a response ready, one that was precise and entirely unpleasant, when Caleb Whitmore stepped forward. He didn't do anything dramatic. He didn't reach for anything or raise his voice or make any gesture that could be described as threatening. He simply moved from his position near the counter to a position between Evelyn and the 3 men, and he stood there, and the room changed. He looked at Davis Karn with those dark, unhurried eyes, and he said, "The lady told you she's with a customer." Karn's smile thinned. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "No," Caleb agreed. "We haven't." The pause stretched. Yates shifted his weight. The stranger in the doorway had gone very still, in the way that men go still when they are deciding something. "This is private business," Carney said. "Then I reckon you ought to conduct it during private hours," Caleb said, "and not walk into a woman's place of business uninvited and start talking about difficulties." Something moved across Carney's face. Something fast and calculating and quickly hidden. He looked past Caleb at Evelyn. "Mr. Graves will be in touch, Miss Carter. I hope you'll give his proposal the consideration it deserves." He tipped his hat. "Good day." They left. The bell jangled. Silence. Evelyn realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out carefully through her teeth and picked up her father's letter again with hands that she was determined not to let tremble. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No." Caleb agreed. He had already stepped back to give her space, which she noted. "But your father would have done it for me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at the letter. "There's more here than you've told me," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "How much more?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful in the way of a man who is accustomed to measuring out difficult information. "I think your father knew about that spring for a long time," he said. "And I think he knew someone was going to come for it eventually. That letter—" He nodded at the paper in her hands. He wrote it the last time I passed through Red Willow Creek, about 18 months ago. He asked me to keep it until I needed to use it, and he said I'd know when that time came." Evelyn read the rest of the letter standing at her counter in the heat of that summer afternoon. When she finished, she set it down. She was quiet for a very long time. "He knew," she said finally. "He knew what was under that land." "Yes, ma'am." "And he never told me." "He wrote that he didn't want you to carry it alone before you were ready." Caleb's voice was low. "He said you were the strongest person he'd ever known, but that some weight needs to be shared to be survived." The thing that lived in Evelyn's chest, the hard, compressed thing that had been living there since the morning she stood beside her father's grave in frozen ground with no one holding her upright, shifted. She pressed her lips together. "The spring," she said. "What's under it?" "Clean mountain water running year-round even through drought years. Your father had it surveyed quietly 10 years back. The whole upper meadow sits above a deep aquifer, the kind of water source that could supply half the county if it was properly piped and channeled." Caleb met her eyes. "In a drought year, that makes it the most valuable piece of land in this valley." Evelyn looked at the letter in her hand. Then she looked at the door through which Davis Carn had walked. Then she looked at Caleb Whitmore, who had ridden for 2 weeks through mountain passes to bring her a letter from a dead man, and who had stepped in front of 3 other men without being asked, and who was now looking at her with the patient stillness of someone who intends to stay as long as he is needed. "You could have given me that letter and ridden on," she said. "I could have," he agreed. "Why didn't you?" He looked at her steadily. "Because your father asked me not to, and because Graves's men were already watching this store when I came into town this morning." He paused. "And because a man who rode 2 weeks to find a woman and hand her a problem has a certain obligation to help her through it." Evelyn folded the letter. She tucked it into the pocket of her apron. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Caleb. I don't need a man to fight my battles for me." "I know," he said. "Your father mentioned that too." Something almost unwilling moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but the cousin of one. "He was an honest man," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Best kind." She looked toward the window. The street outside was going about its business wagons, moving voices calling the ordinary motions of a summer afternoon in a small town that had no idea it was sitting on top of a fortune in groundwater. Or perhaps some of them did. Perhaps Nathaniel Graves knew exactly what that land was worth and had known it for years. "The land records," she said. "He mentioned them. My father. He said there was a copy filed in the territorial office at Millhaven. That's what he told me." "Then that's where we start." She untied her apron and hung it on the peg behind the counter, with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has made a decision and intends to move. "I'll close up early. I have questions Mr. Whitmore Caleb and I want honest answers, not careful ones." "That's the only kind I know," he said. "We'll see about that." She reached under the counter and produced the lockbox where she kept the store's cash, checked the amount with a practiced eye, and set it in the back room where it lived. Then she came back out and looked at him directly. "You said Graves's men were watching this morning. How many?" "2 that I saw. One near the livery one at the north end of the street. Carney and Yates and a 3rd man came in just now," she said. "So whoever Graves had watching this morning wasn't those 3. "No," Caleb agreed. "Graves has more people working for him than those 3. "How do you know?" "I've been asking questions for 2 weeks. He met her eyes evenly. "I know what your father knew. He didn't just send me here with a letter, Miss Carter. He sent me here with everything he'd spent 5 years finding out. About Graves, about the land records, about what's been happening in this valley." She was still for a moment. Then she said, "Show me." He reached into the inside breast pocket of his coat, careful, unhurried, and produced a second folded document, older even than the letter its creases worn to near transparency at the folds. A map. Her father's handwriting marked the edges. "Property lines, spring locations, survey points." And in the lower right corner, in the cramped notation her father used for important figures, a series of numbers that made the blood move differently in Evelyn's veins when she understood what she was looking at. The water survey. She spread it on the counter. "He had this done quietly," she said. "Not a question. Paid a surveyor from out of the county. Man named Hollis. Your father didn't want anyone local knowing." Caleb tapped a point on the map. "This is the spring, you know. But there are 2 others here, and here both of them running from the same aquifer. Your father never developed them. Never told anyone they were there. He was waiting." "For what?" "For the law to catch up with what Graves was doing." Caleb's voice was level, but something moved underneath it. "Your father had documentation. About 4 ranches in this valley that Graves has acquired in the last 6 years. Every single one of them the owner died or left under circumstances that weren't as simple as they looked, or signed paperwork that they later said they didn't understand when they signed it." He looked at her directly. "Your father believed Graves intended the same thing for your family's land." The afternoon was very quiet around them. Evelyn looked at the map. She looked at the figures her father had written. She thought about the fact that he had faced this, had known what was coming, and had gone to his grave without telling her, because he believed it would frighten her. Because he believed she needed to be protected from the knowledge. She loved her father. She had loved him completely and without reservation. But she thought not for the first time, and with a clarity sharpened by months of carrying his debts alone, "Thomas Carter, you damn stubborn man." "He should have told me," she said quietly. Caleb said nothing. He didn't agree, and he didn't disagree, and he didn't try to explain or excuse or soften it. He simply let her have the truth of it without argument, which was more respect than most people in Red Willow Creek had shown her in the 14 months since her father died. She folded the map carefully. "The territorial office in Mill Haven," she said. "That's 3 days' ride. 2.5 if the weather holds." She looked up at him. "You're proposing to ride to Mill Haven." "I'm proposing nothing," he said. "You know your situation better than I do. I'm telling you what your father told me and where the documentation is. What you do with it is your business." "But you'd ride with me if I decided to go." "Your father asked me to see this through," Caleb said simply. "I intend to see it through." She studied him for a long moment. The unhurried eyes, the stillness, the complete absence of the particular male urgency she was accustomed to dealing with. The urgency that always felt like pressure, like someone pushing against her boundaries to see where they gave. There was none of that in Caleb Whitmore. He simply stood in her store and waited to be told what was needed. "You understand," she said, "that I won't be managed." "I do," he said, "and that any decisions about this land are mine to make." "Understood." "And that a debt to my father doesn't give you authority over how I handle my own affairs." "Miss Carter." His voice was patient and direct. "Your father's letter was specific on that point. He said, and I'm going to quote him because he made me read the relevant passage twice. He said, 'Do not try to run this for her. She'll figure out what's right faster than you will. Your job is to make sure she has what she needs to do it.'" A pause. "That's what I'm here for." The thing in Evelyn's chest shifted again. She had been alone for 14 months. She had done every single thing: the ledgers, the negotiations, the bank meetings, the loading and unloading of supply wagons at dawn. Because she couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it. She had done every single thing alone, and she had told herself that was fine, that was sufficient, that independence was not loneliness but rather freedom. She had believed it most of the time. Standing in her store in the summer heat with her father's map under her hands and a mountain cowboy waiting for her instructions, she felt something she had forgotten the shape of. She felt like she was not entirely alone. She did not know what to do with that feeling. She set it aside very carefully, in the way you set aside a fragile thing you're not sure you should trust your own hands with. "I'll need to arrange for someone to watch the store," she said. "Mrs. Delacroix has a niece who knows the business. I'll speak to her this evening." She refolded the map and held it out to him. "Keep this. I don't want it in the store if Graves decides to send someone while I'm talking to the Delacroix family." He took the map without argument. "One more thing," she said. "Ma'am, those men who were watching this morning, and the 3 who came in just now." She looked at him steadily. How long before Graves moves? Caleb was quiet for a beat. I think, he said carefully, that you making inquiries about your land records was probably going to be the trigger. He'll want to move before you get to Millhaven. So we don't have 2.5 days. I wouldn't count on it. She nodded once. The movement was decisive in the particular way that characterized everything she did. No wasted motion, no second guessing, just the clean mechanical action of a woman who has learned that hesitation is a form of surrender. Tonight then, she said. We leave tonight. Caleb looked at her. Something moved in his eyes that she couldn't quite name. Not surprise, but something adjacent to it. Something almost like recognition. Tonight, he agreed. Outside, the summer sky was turning the color of copper and rust. Somewhere up on the mountain, a hawk called once and fell silent. Evelyn Carter began making her preparations. She did not know yet what Nathaniel Graves had planned, or how far he was willing to go, or what her father's documents actually contained in their full detail. She did not know what she was going to find in Millhaven. She did not know the man who had walked into her store and placed an old letter on her counter and set her father's name with the voice of someone who owed a debt he intended to pay. She did not know any of it, but she knew the shape of her land. She knew the numbers her father had written in that map's corner. She knew the sound of Davis Carn's voice when he said the word difficulties, and she knew what kind of man uses that tone. And she knew, in the bone-deep way, she knew most things, that the next several days were going to determine whether everything Thomas Carter had spent his life building was going to survive his absence. She locked the front door of the store. She set the sign to closed. She walked into the back room to begin pulling together what she would need for a 2.5-day ride through the mountains. Behind her, Caleb Whitmore stood in the empty store, turning his hat slowly in his hands, watching the door she'd walked through with the quiet attention of a man who has made a promise and does not intend to break it. The summer heat pressed down on Red Willow Creek. Somewhere in the valley, Nathaniel Graves was making his own calculations. And somewhere in a surveyor's filing cabinet in the territorial office at Millhaven, a set of documents waited that would either save Evelyn Carter's land or make her the next name on a list of people who had crossed the wrong man in the wrong valley at the wrong time. Tonight, they rode. They rode out of Red Willow Creek when the last light was bleeding out of the sky. Evelyn on her bay mare, and Caleb on a dark mountain horse that moved through the evening without a sound. She had left a note for Mrs. Delacroix's niece folded inside the store's front lockbox with 3 weeks of operating instructions and enough cash to keep the shelves from going bare. She had packed light 1 saddlebag, a bedroll, the cash box from the back room. She had not told anyone where she was going. She had learned a long time ago that some information was safer in your own chest. Caleb set the pace steady, not punishing the kind of pace that covered ground without destroying the horses. He rode slightly ahead on the trail and slightly to her left, which put him between her and the western slope, where the tree cover was thickest, and she noticed this without commenting on it. It was the kind of positioning a man did when he was thinking about threat, when he was putting himself between a person and the direction trouble was most likely to come from. It was the kind of thing her father used to do. She did not know how to feel about that, so she filed it away and focused on the trail. They rode for an hour in silence before she spoke. "Tell me about Nathaniel Graves," she said. "Everything you know, not the careful version." Caleb was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was deciding on the right starting point, rather than deciding whether to answer. "He came to Red Willow Creek about 8 years ago," he said. "Showed up with money and manners, and bought the Hendricks spread out on the eastern flats. Inside of 2 years, he had 3 more properties. Inside of 5, he controlled the main cattle corridor through the valley." He paused. The men who sold to him, some of them were willing. Some of them had what I'd call a lot of bad luck right before they decided to sell. What kind of bad luck? The Owens family had a barn fire that took their horses. Martin Sloan's water rights got contested by a man from out of county who turned out to be working for a surveying company that also turned out to have connections to Graves. The Teller widow was offered a legal settlement on a debt that she later said she didn't understand properly when she signed. He paused again. Your father documented all of it. Evelyn absorbed this. And no one went to the territorial authority. Your father was planning to. He wanted the full picture first, every transaction, every name, every piece of paper. He was a methodical man. He was, she said. Sometimes too methodical. He wanted it airtight. He said a half-built case against a man like Graves was worse than no case at all. Because Graves would know someone was watching. And have time to cover it. She thought about this as the trail climbed into cooler air, the mountains closing in on either side with their summer dry smell of pine resin and dust. The spring, she said. When did Graves realize what was on our land? Your father believed Graves has known for at least 3 years. He thinks the same surveyor your father hired quietly, the man named Hollis, was approached by Graves afterward, either paid or pressured to share what he found. The night insects were beginning to sound around them. From somewhere on the slope above, something moved through the brush, something small, not a threat. So Graves has known for 3 years, Evelyn said. And he waited. He waited until your father was gone, Caleb said. The words landed quietly without dramatization, and that restraint made them land harder. She felt them in her ribs. He waited until I was alone, she said. Yes, ma'am. She let the silence run for a moment before she trusted her voice with the next question. The men my father documented, the Owens family, the Sloan man, the Teller widow. Are any of them still in the area? Martin Sloan is. Runs a small operation about 4 miles east of town. He's been watching Graves for years, but he's got a wife and 3 young children, and he won't move without being certain the ground is solid under him. A pause. He'd talk to you, I think. Your father trusted him. Anyone else? The Delacroix brothers? She turned to look at him in the dark. The Delacroix brothers, no. Your father talked to them, yes. He didn't tell them everything, but he told them enough that they'd recognize the shape of it when it came to a head. Caleb met her eyes briefly across the trail. They've been watching over your store these past months without being asked. Evelyn faced forward again. She thought about Cord Delacroix, who paid cash that morning, which was unusual. She thought about how often one of the brothers seemed to materialize at the far end of the street whenever she was dealing with a difficult customer. She had attributed it to coincidence and the natural rhythms of a small town. She had not attributed it to design. Her father's design. He built a network, she said slowly, around me, without telling me. He was worried. I know what he was worried about. The edge in her voice was sharper than she intended. She heard it and softened deliberately. I'm not angry at you. I just... She stopped. Tried again. I spent 14 months believing I was doing it alone, that I had figured out how to survive alone. And now I find out there were people. You were doing it alone, Caleb said. The work was yours. Your father set up a safety net, I suppose you'd call it. But nobody did your work for you, Miss Carter. Nobody paid your debts, or ran your ledgers, or got up before dawn to unload your supply wagons. He looked at her directly. You did all of that. The network was just there to catch you if things went truly sideways. It wasn't there to carry you. She was quiet for a long moment. He should still have told me, she said finally. He should have. Caleb agreed without qualification, and that simple honesty steadied something in her that the explanation hadn't quite reached. They made camp in a hollow off the main trail around the 4th hour. No fire. Just the horses hobbled on good grass, and 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of a flat granite shelf. Caleb took the first watch without discussion, settling himself with his back to a boulder and his eyes on the trail they'd come up. Evelyn lay with her father's letter inside her coat and stared at the mountains above her, which were dark shapes against a sky busy with stars. She did not sleep for a long time. When she finally did, she dreamed of her father's handwriting. She woke before dawn to find Caleb already up the horses checked and resettled, his bedroll packed. He handed her a strip of dried beef and a canteen without ceremony and said, I think we had company on the lower trail about 2 hours ago. 2 horses moving slow. They didn't come up. She took the canteen and was instantly completely awake. Graves's men. Most likely. They either lost us or they're circling ahead. He looked at the eastern sky. We should move. How far to the Benson crossing? 6 hours at good pace, maybe 5 if we push. He looked at her. You decide. We push, she said. They rode hard through the early morning, the mountain air cool enough that she was grateful for it, the trail rising steadily toward the Benson Ridge crossing that would put them officially into the next county and out of whatever local authority Graves might be able to apply. At the top of the first serious climb, Caleb pulled up suddenly. Wait, he said. She stopped the mare. He was looking down the trail behind them completely still, and she had learned in the past several hours that when Caleb Whitmore went completely still, the intelligent response was to also go completely still. 300 yards below, 2 riders were coming up the trail. They were moving at a pace that was not leisurely. Do they know we're here? She said quietly. They're about to. He turned his horse and she turned the mare, and they moved off the main trail into the tree cover to the left, picking their way through the pine growth with care. The footing was uneven, but manageable. She could hear her own heartbeat. The riders reached the section of trail where they had just been standing. They stopped. Even from inside the tree cover, she could hear one of them say something in a low voice. She couldn't make out the words. The other rider answered, and she heard the word fresh and knew they were looking at hoofprints. Caleb reached across and touched her arm once. One finger pointing left deeper into the trees moving parallel to the ridge. She nodded. They moved without speaking, following the natural contour of the slope, staying below the ridgeline, to avoid silhouetting themselves. She could no longer hear the riders on the main trail. That was not necessarily good news. 40 minutes of careful, silent riding brought them out above the Benson crossing, coming at it from the north rather than the main approach, which meant they came out onto the county road at a point that was already well past the crossing itself. Caleb pulled up and looked back at the approach they'd come down. Nothing following. Did we lose them? She said. For now. He looked ahead at the county road which stretched east toward Millhaven in a long curve. But they'll figure the route eventually. We've got maybe 4 hours before someone thinks to telegraph ahead. Evelyn straightened in the saddle. Then we don't stop. She put her heels to the mare, and they rode. The sun climbed and the day heated, and they stopped only to water the horses at creek crossings moving steadily covering ground. She found herself recalculating as they rode, turning over what she knew, building the shape of what needed to happen in Millhaven. Thinking about the territorial office's filing system, about the land records her father had referenced, about what legal argument would need to accompany the documentation Caleb carried. She had been good at this kind of thinking for as long as she could remember. Her father used to say she had the mind of a lawyer trapped in a ranchwoman's life. She had always suspected he meant it as a compliment, though it had taken her years to receive it as one. The territorial clerk, she said around mid-morning. Do you know who holds the position? Man named Aldous Kepler. Been in the office about 4 years. Caleb pulled a slight face. Your father described him as thorough, but not particularly fast. Thorough is what we need, she thought. We'll need witnesses to authenticate the documentation. People who can swear to having direct knowledge of Graves's transactions. She looked at him. You can testify to your interactions with my father. What he told you. When? Yes. And Martin Sloan if we can get him to Millhaven. And the Teller widow if she's willing. She was already building the structure of it, the architecture of evidence, how it would need to be presented, what the clerk would need to see in order to flag the filings for the territorial judge's review. This isn't just a land dispute. If my father's documentation is complete, this is fraud. Possibly worse. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Your father used the word conspiracy, he said. He wrote it in the margin of his survey notes. I didn't mention it because I didn't know how... You didn't know how I'd take it. It's a serious word. It's an accurate word, she said. If Graves has been systematically acquiring land through manufactured crises and falsified documents, that's not individual fraud. That's coordinated. That's planned. She looked at the road ahead. How many properties has he taken in 6 years? Your father documented 4. He believed there were likely 2 more that were harder to prove. 6 families. The number sat in her chest with its full weight. 6 families who lost what their parents built. Yes, ma'am. And he's been operating in plain sight, with his suits and his manners and his careful legal language. She heard the flatness in her own voice and recognized it, the particular register she reached when anger had compressed itself into something colder and more efficient. He's been doing it in plain sight, and nobody in that valley has been able to touch him. Until now, Caleb said. She looked at him. Your father spent 5 years building a case, Caleb said, and his voice was steady and certain in a way that she found against her expectations genuinely grounding. He chose every piece of evidence carefully. He chose the people he trusted carefully. He chose the timing carefully. And at the end of 5 years, he chose you to carry it forward. He met her eyes. That wasn't accident, and it wasn't sentimentality. Your father was not a sentimental man. No, she said. He wasn't. He trusted you with this because he believed you were the right person to finish it. Not because you were his daughter. Because you were capable. Caleb paused. I think he was right. She faced forward and said nothing. But something that had been knotted behind her sternum for 14 months loosened very slightly by a single thread. They reached the outskirts of Millhaven as the afternoon was beginning to shade toward evening, a proper town larger than Red Willow Creek, with a main street wide enough for 2 wagons abreast, and a territorial office building that advertised its function with a painted sign above the door. Evelyn felt the horse's exhaustion, and her own in equal measure the particular dense fatigue of a hard day's riding that settled in your thighs and lower back and behind your eyes. We get the horses settled first, she said. Then the office, if there's still time before they close. If not, we find a boarding house and we're there when they open. Agreed. He paused. And we don't use our names at the boarding house. She looked at him. If Graves has connections in Millhaven, of course, she thought. Carter and Whitmore are specific enough to trace. We'll use... She thought about it for half a second. Marshall, Mr. and Mrs. A. Marshall. Something moved in Caleb's expression. Not discomfort exactly, but a kind of careful neutrality. That'll work. It's a practical arrangement, not a personal one, she said briskly. 2 people traveling together with no apparent connection are more notable than a married couple passing through. I understand that, he said. Good. She kneed the mare toward the livery sign at the north end of the street. Let's move. The territorial office was still open. Barely a harried-looking young man in a clerk's jacket was already pulling on his coat when Evelyn pushed through the door with Caleb 1 step behind her. We're closing, the young man said. I can see that, Evelyn said. I need to speak with Aldous Kepler. Tonight if possible, tomorrow morning at the latest. The young man looked at her, then at Caleb, then back at her. Mr. Kepler he's available by appointment. Then I'd like to make one, for tomorrow at 8 o'clock if that's possible. She kept her voice pleasant and her expression composed. We've ridden 2 days from Red Willow Creek on a matter that involves potentially fraudulent land filings. I believe Mr. Kepler will want to know about it. The clerk's hand paused on the button he had been fastening. Red Willow Creek, he said. That's correct. Red Willow Creek in the Whitmore Valley District. Yes. The young man looked at her for a long moment. Then he said with a slight shift in his tone that she could not quite interpret. What name shall I give Mr. Kepler? Carter, she said. Evelyn Carter. The clerk wrote it down. He did not look up when he said, Mr. Kepler will see you at 8. Outside, she and Caleb stood on the boardwalk in the cooling evening, the sounds of a larger town moving around them. He recognized Red Willow Creek, Caleb said quietly. I noticed that. That could mean Kepler is already aware of Graves's activities. He paused. Or it could mean Graves has already been in contact with this office. She kept her expression neutral and her voice even. Or both. Or both, he agreed. She turned toward the street. We need that boarding house. And we need to think carefully about tomorrow morning. And we need to decide how much we show Kepler before we know which way he sits, Caleb said. Exactly. She started walking. We show him enough to get his attention, not enough to give him anything to work with if he's not what we need him to be. She glanced sideways at Caleb. Can you read a man quickly? Reasonably well. I need to focus on the documents. I need you to watch him. His expressions. What questions he asks and in what order. What he doesn't ask. She looked at Caleb directly. Can you do that? Yes, he said. Good. She pushed open the door of the boarding house they'd identified and stepped inside. Because tomorrow morning, everything depends on us reading that room correctly. The boarding house keeper was a comfortable woman named Aldridge, who asked no questions about Mr. and Mrs. Marshall, except whether they needed separate or shared accommodation, and Evelyn requested adjacent rooms with a connecting door, and Mrs. Aldridge raised one eyebrow and charged her accordingly. It was a practical solution, and Evelyn declined to feel complicated about it. She sat at the small writing desk in her room that night and went through her father's letter again, and then the map, and then the notes she had been keeping in her own hand since leaving Red Willow Creek. She was building a sequence, the order in which the evidence needed to be presented, the questions that would need to be answered, the potential challenges that a territorial clerk or a territorial judge or a lawyer working for Nathaniel Graves would raise against each piece of documentation. It was past midnight when a light knock came at the connecting door. She opened it. Caleb was fully dressed, which told her he hadn't been to sleep either. I've been thinking about Kepler, he said. So have I. Come in. He sat on the straight-backed chair by the window. She returned to the desk. For a moment, they were simply two people in a small room, and the normalcy of it struck her oddly, the ordinary quality of two people thinking through a problem together, which she had not experienced in 14 months, and which she had not realized until this moment she had missed. If Kepler has been in contact with Graves, Caleb said, then our arriving and asking about land records is going to get back to Graves within hours. We may already be past the point where that matters, she said. Graves knows we left Red Willow Creek. He knows the direction we rode. He's not a stupid man. He'll have concluded by now that Millhaven is our destination. Which means the question isn't whether he knows we're here. It's whether we can move faster than his response. Yes. She tapped the edge of the desk with one finger, thinking. If we get the original deeds into Kepler's office under official review, if they are formally flagged and logged in the territorial record, then Graves can't quietly make them disappear. Whatever his relationship with Kepler, there's a limit to what even a corrupt clerk will do when a filing is officially on record. And if Kepler refuses to file them, then we ask him to explain in writing why he's refusing, and we take that to the next level up. She met Caleb's eyes. My father wasn't the only one who kept records. The Owens family, the Teller widow, Martin Sloan. If this comes to a territorial court, we need all of them. Caleb nodded slowly. I can ride back to Red Willow Creek. Get Sloan and the others moving toward Millhaven while you're in the office tomorrow. I don't want you to ride back alone. The words came out before she thought about them. She heard them in the air and felt the particular exposure of having said something unrehearsed. I mean, she said. I know what you mean, Caleb said, and his voice was straightforward enough that it didn't humiliate her. Two people are safer than one going back through that pass right now. Yes, she said. That's what I mean. He looked at her steadily. I can take care of myself on a mountain trail. I know that. She met his eyes. She stopped. Tried a different approach. My father trusted you. He spent 5 years looking for somebody he could trust with this, and you're the person he chose. That makes you... She stopped again. This was not coming out the way she intended. Valuable, Caleb said. Quietly. Yes, she said. Valuable. And I don't want to lose the most valuable asset I currently have to two of Graves's men on a mountain pass. Something shifted in his expression. Something small, nearly invisible, that might have been amusement, or might have been something warmer than amusement. All right, he said. We stay together. We stay together, she agreed. We go into that office together tomorrow morning, and we read the room together, and then we decide our next move. He nodded, started to rise. Caleb. He paused. My father. She felt her way through the words carefully. Did he talk about me? I mean, not about my capability or what I could do with the land. Did he talk about... She stopped. About you specifically. Caleb sat back down. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He talked about you the way a man talks about the thing he's most proud of in his whole life, he said. He talked about the way you could read a room full of difficult men and know in 30 seconds who was honest and who wasn't. He talked about how you took over the store accounts when you were 12 years old because he was bad with numbers, and you could see it before he could admit it. He talked about the summer you were 16 and the creek flooded and you spent 3 days knee-deep in water redirecting the channel to save the root cellar, and how you didn't stop until it was done, and then you slept for 14 hours. A pause. He talked about how when your mother died, you held the whole family together for 2 months before you let yourself cry. The room was very quiet. He said, Caleb's voice gentled by 1 degree. He said the only thing he'd done wrong by you was not telling you soon enough how extraordinary you were. He said he kept waiting for the right moment, and the right moment kept not arriving. And then it was too late, she said. Yes, she did not cry. She had used up most of her tears in the first weeks after her father died, and what was left behind was not grief exactly, but something heavier and harder, a kind of love that had nowhere to go, that had been carrying itself in her chest for 14 months without destination. She said, Thank you for telling me. He would have wanted you to know, Caleb said simply. After he had gone back to his room, she sat for a long time at the writing desk with her hands flat on the papers and her father's voice somewhere in her memory. Not the voice of a dying man, but the voice she actually remembered best. The particular warm rumble of it when he was explaining something complicated, when he was telling her she'd done well, when he was laughing at one of his own jokes while she rolled her eyes. That was the version she'd been carrying. She'd carry it a while longer. In the morning, everything would depend on a territorial clerk named Kepler and whatever loyalties or ambitions he carried to work with him. In the morning, they would find out how much of what Thomas Carter had built over 5 careful years was enough to hold against a man like Nathaniel Graves. But the morning wasn't here yet. She extinguished the lamp and lay down, and this time when she closed her eyes, she slept. In the next room, Caleb Whitmore sat in the dark and watched the window and thought about debts. He had spent 11 years carrying Thomas Carter's name with him through mountain passes and hard winters, and the particular loneliness of a man who has built walls so carefully he's forgotten how to take them down. He thought about the woman on the other side of the connecting door, the steadiness of her, the quickness, the way she had looked at her father's letter with an expression that was grief and anger and determination all occupying the same square inch of her face simultaneously. He thought about the way she had said, I don't want you to ride back alone, and then immediately tried to translate it into something purely strategic. He had let her. It had seemed like the right thing to do. He turned his hat in his hands in the dark the way he had done in her store that first afternoon, and he thought about what Thomas Carter had written in that letter, the part he hadn't shown her, the part that wasn't about land records or water rights or Nathaniel Graves at all. She's going to be angry at me for a while, Thomas had written for not telling her sooner. That's fair. But once she's done being angry, she's going to need someone to stand beside her, not behind her, not in front of her. Beside. She doesn't need protecting Caleb, she needs a witness, someone to see her clearly and not flinch. I think that might be something you're good at. I think that might be something you both need. Outside the boarding house window, the town of Millhaven moved through its quiet nighttime business, completely unaware that tomorrow morning, something was going to begin in a territorial records office that would change the shape of the Whitmore Valley for years to come. Caleb set down his hat. He closed his eyes. He slept. Aldous Kepler was a small man with a large desk and the particular manner of someone who had spent 20 years making himself feel larger than he was by surrounding himself with official documents and the language that went with them. He had thin gray hair combed with precision across a head that Evelyn suspected had been worrying itself bald for years, and he greeted them at 8 o'clock exactly with a handshake that was firm in the way of a man who had read somewhere that a firm handshake conveyed authority. She read him in 30 seconds. Ambitious. Not corrupt, but afraid of becoming irrelevant. The kind of man who would protect himself before he protected anyone else, but who still retained enough conscience to be uncomfortable about it. She could work with that. Miss Carter? He gestured to the chairs across from his desk. You indicated yesterday that your visit concerns land filings in the Red Willow Creek area. That's correct. She sat. Caleb took the chair to her left, angled slightly so he could see both her and Kepler without turning his head. I have documentation relating to a series of land acquisitions in the Whitmore Valley District that I believe constitute systematic fraud against multiple landholders. Kepler's expression did not change. That was interesting. A man hearing that for the first time would have reacted surprise, skepticism, concern, something. He heard the words, and his face stayed exactly where it was. That's a serious allegation, he said. Yes. She agreed. I know. You'll understand that the territorial office requires substantive documentation before it can. I have substantive documentation. She placed the first folded document on his desk. Not her father's letter, not yet. The water survey first, the one with the figures. This is a land survey commissioned by my father, Thomas Carter, approximately 10 years ago. It documents the presence of a significant underground water source on Carter family land, specifically the upper acreage bordering Nathaniel Graves's eastern holdings. Kepler looked at the survey without touching it. A land survey, he said, does not constitute evidence of fraud. No, she said. But it constitutes evidence of motive. She placed the second document beside the first. This is a timeline my father compiled over 5 years documenting 6 land acquisitions made by Nathaniel Graves in the Whitmore Valley District. In 4 of those 6 cases, the previous landowner experienced what I would describe as manufactured crises immediately before selling a barn fire, a contested water rights claim originating from a company with traceable connections to Graves, a legal settlement signed under conditions that the signatory later disputed. Now Kepler touched the documents. He picked up the timeline and read it. His face stayed neutral, but his right hand resting on the edge of the desk tightened slightly on the wood. Caleb saw it. She caught the small shift of his eyes and knew he'd marked it. Your father compiled this himself, Kepler said. Yes. Over 5 years. He was a methodical man. And where is your father now? He died 14 months ago. She kept her voice even. Which is consistent with the pattern you're reading in that document. The Carter land was next. Kepler set the timeline down. He looked at her. Miss Carter, I want to be candid with you about something. Please. This office has received prior communication regarding the Carter land holdings. He said it carefully, the way a man says something he's been rehearsing. From a legal representative acting on behalf of Mr. Nathaniel Graves. The communication concerned a boundary survey that Mr. Graves's people conducted last month, which indicated a possible discrepancy in the original Carter deed filings. There it was. Evelyn did not move. Beside her, she felt Caleb go still in the particular way that meant he was paying very close attention. When did you receive this communication? She said. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. Before she had any idea what was coming. Before the letter. Before Caleb. Before Davis Karn walked into her store with his careful language about difficulties. 3 weeks ago, while she was paying down debt and measuring canvas, and believing she understood the shape of her situation. And you didn't feel that a communication contesting my family's deed was something the current landholder ought to be informed about, she said. The words came out precise and level, which took effort. The communication was preliminary in nature. Mr. Kepler? She leaned forward slightly. A man with considerable resources and a pattern of fraudulent land acquisition sent a legal communication to your office contesting my deed 3 weeks ago, and nobody informed me. While his men were watching my store. While he was waiting for the right moment to move against a woman living alone on valuable land. She held Kepler's gaze. I'd like to understand why. The silence in the office was dense. Kepler set both documents down. Miss Carter, I assure you that proper procedure was followed. I'm not here for assurances, she said. I'm here to file a formal fraud complaint against Nathaniel Graves, supported by 5 years of documented evidence. I'm here to request that the original Carter land deed and all associated water rights filings be placed under official review and protection pending investigation. And I'm here to ask whether this office is capable of performing that function, or whether I need to take this to the Territorial Commissioner directly. The last sentence landed like a dropped stone. Kepler looked at her, then at Caleb. Caleb was looking at Kepler with an expression that communicated nothing at all, which was its own kind of message. The Territorial Commissioner, Kepler said slowly. Commissioner Harold Vance, she said, whose office, as I understand it, has been conducting its own review of land transaction irregularities in 3 districts over the past 18 months. She paused. My father's documentation references that review. He was aware of it. This was the thing she hadn't told Caleb. The thing she'd found in the very last page of her father's notes written in the compressed hand he used when he was tired. A name. A reference. A thin thread connecting Thomas Carter's 5-year project to something larger that was already in motion at the territorial level. Kepler's face had changed. Your father was in contact with Commissioner Vance, he said. He had communicated with the commissioner's office, yes. She held herself very still. I don't know the exact nature or extent of that communication, but the reference is in the documents. She was not lying. She was presenting what she had in the most accurate and most useful arrangement possible. Her father had always said there was a difference between what was false and what was not yet fully confirmed. Kepler stood up. Excuse me for a moment, he said. I need to retrieve some files from the back office. He left. The moment the door closed, Caleb turned to her. Commissioner Vance, he said quietly. Your father's notes mentioned him. 1 line, 1 reference. She kept her voice below the level of the walls. I don't know if there was actual contact or if my father was aware of the review and tracking it. But Kepler doesn't know that. And the reference in those notes is real. Caleb was quiet for a second. You played that very well. I played what I had. She looked at the closed door. He went to check something. Either there's a file on my father in that back room, or he's sending word to someone or both. How long do we give him? 5 minutes. She looked at the documents on the desk. If he's not back in 5 minutes, we start asking questions about his filing procedures loudly enough that the clerk in the front office can hear us. 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, Kepler came back. He was carrying a thin folder, and his expression had shifted, the careful neutrality replaced by something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like a man who has realized his comfortable position has become considerably less comfortable. Miss Carter, he said, sitting down, I owe you an apology. She waited. The communication we received from Graves's legal representative was filed in a manner that in retrospect should have triggered a notification to the current deed holder. That notification was not sent. I cannot explain the specific chain of decisions that led to that omission. He paused. I can tell you that there is an existing file in this office relating to land transactions in the Whitmore Valley District. That file was initiated approximately 8 months ago following a separate inquiry. Your father's name appears in that file. Evelyn's hands were flat on her thighs under the desk where Kepler couldn't see them. What kind of inquiry? She said. A preliminary investigation into potential irregularities in deed filings. Kepler opened the folder. Miss Carter, what I'm about to tell you is not yet public record, but given what you've brought me this morning, I think you need to know. He looked at her directly for what might have been the first time in the meeting. Nathaniel Graves is already under observation by this office. Has been for the better part of a year. The challenge has been documentation specifically, documentation of the kind that your father appears to have spent 5 years compiling. The room was absolutely still. You've been building a case against him, she said. A preliminary file. Not a case, not yet. We've been missing the connecting evidence. The specific documented pattern of manufactured crises that would establish intentionality rather than coincidence. Kepler looked down at the timeline she had placed on his desk. This, he said, is what we've been missing. Evelyn looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at her with an expression that said your father knew exactly what he was doing. Mr. Kepler, she said, what happens now? Now, Kepler said, with the first genuine decisiveness she had heard from him. I contact the Commissioner's office, today, and I formally accept your documentation into the record under official protection. He began reaching for his pen. But I need to tell you something important, Miss Carter. Something that you need to hear before you leave this office. She waited. Graves will know you came here. If he doesn't know already, he will within hours. The moment this documentation enters the official record, he loses the ability to make it disappear through legal maneuvering. But that doesn't mean he'll stop. Kepler's voice was serious. A man who has operated for 6 years with the confidence he's demonstrated does not simply accept that the situation has changed. He adjusts his tactics. You're telling me I'm in danger, she said. I'm telling you that getting your land officially protected and getting yourself personally protected are two different things. Kepler set down his pen. The Territorial Marshal's office has a deputy assigned to this district, a man named Harlan Briggs. Not Briggs, Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but completely flat. Kepler looked at him. It was the first time he'd addressed Caleb directly in the entire meeting. You know Deputy Briggs, Kepler said. I know that Harlan Briggs's cousin is married to Davis Karn, who is Nathaniel Graves's primary enforcer. Caleb held Kepler's gaze without inflection. So I'd suggest that whatever you're planning to communicate to the Territorial Marshal's office, you do it over Briggs's head. The silence that followed was very loud. I see, Kepler said after a moment. I was not aware of that connection. No, Caleb said. I expect not. They left the Territorial office an hour later with the documentation filed receipted and officially entered into the record. Kepler had been as good as his word, efficient and purposeful, once the decision was made, moving with the energy of a man who had been waiting for the right catalyst and had finally found it. Outside on the boardwalk, Evelyn stopped and took a breath. He was already building a case, she said. Your father knew, Caleb said. That line in his notes wasn't accidental. He knew the office was watching Graves. He spent 5 years building the piece they were missing. He could have just sent the documents to Kepler's office. He could have. Caleb put on his hat. But then you wouldn't have had any part of it. You wouldn't have known what your land was worth, or what was coming for it until it was too late to do anything but react. He looked at her. He wanted you in the room when it happened. He wanted you to be the one to put that documentation on that desk. She turned this over in her mind. The image of her father, methodical, patient, planning 5 years into the future, arranging the pieces so that when the moment came, it would be his daughter's hands that placed them. Stubborn man, she said. Yes, ma'am, Caleb agreed. They were halfway down the main street of Millhaven when the shot came. It cracked off the building to their left, a sound like a green branch snapping, and the wood of the post beside Evelyn's head splintered. She was moving before she'd processed it, pure instinct dropping her low and sideways, and Caleb was already pulling her behind a water trough, his body between her and the direction the shot had come from. You hit? He said. No. He had his pistol out. He was scanning the roof lines. Left side. Upper building maybe 200 yards. The street had erupted, people scattering horses, shying a woman screaming somewhere to the right. Evelyn pressed herself against the trough and felt her heart slamming in her chest with a force that was almost structural, like it was trying to break through. They followed us, she said, or they were already here. His voice was level in the way of a man who had trained himself to keep it level under exactly this kind of pressure. Stay low. There's an alley 12 feet to your right. When I move, you move. And go where? Sheriff's office is 2 blocks north. That's where we're going. He looked at her once directly, and his eyes were serious and focused and completely without panic. Trust me. She did not say, I trust you. She said, on your move. He moved. She moved with him, staying low, making the alley in the time it took her heart to beat 3 times. Another shot came striking the dirt where they'd been, and then they were in the alley and running. Caleb took the lead, moving fast, but checking back for her every few steps, in a way that wasn't patronizing, just practical, making sure the person behind you is still behind you. The sheriff's office was a square building with a deputy sitting outside the door who came out of his chair when he saw them coming. Someone's shooting from a rooftop on Main, Caleb said, without breaking stride, and the deputy's hand went to his belt, and he was already moving in the other direction before Caleb had finished the sentence. Inside, Caleb shut the door. They stood in the sudden stillness of the office, both of them breathing hard. He moved faster than I expected, she said. Kepler was right. Graves adjusts. Caleb holstered his pistol. The moment we filed that documentation, we became a different kind of problem. The documentation is in the record now. Official. He can't erase it, Caleb said. But he can try to make sure you're not around to testify to it, or to support the commissioner's case when it goes to court. He looked at her. Evelyn, what we filed this morning is evidence. You are a witness. Those are 2 different things to a man like Graves. The use of her first name, unguarded, unrehearsed, nothing formal about it, registered somewhere in her chest. Then we need to get back to Red Willow Creek, she said. Sloan. The Delacroix brothers. The Teller widow. If this is going to court, we need every witness standing. And we need to get back before Graves does. Caleb looked at the door. He'll go for the land itself now. The documentation is out of his reach, so he'll go for the physical property. Get someone in place to create a disputed possession claim. Damage the structures, make it legally complicated. Or burn it down. Yes, he said, or that. The sheriff of Millhaven arrived 20 minutes later, a capable-looking man named Decker, who asked good questions and took notes and communicated the calm, practical authority of someone who had dealt with shootings before and had no illusions about the territory he was policing. He listened to Evelyn's account of the shot and Caleb's identification of the probable position and the context of who they were and why they were in Millhaven, and he wrote all of it down. I know Nathaniel Graves by reputation, Decker said. We don't have jurisdiction in the Whitmore Valley District directly, but if what you've filed with Kepler is what you say it is, the commissioner's office will be moving on this quickly. He looked at Evelyn. My advice is to get back to your property. Establish your physical presence on the land. A man contesting a deed has a much harder case when the current landholder is present and clearly in possession. That's what we're doing, Evelyn said. I'd also suggest you go back a different way than you came. Decker looked at Caleb. You know the Northern Pass? I know it. Harder route, but less predictable. Decker closed his notebook. Whoever took that shot knows the main trail. They left Millhaven within the hour, heading north, and then cutting west at an angle that added half a day to the journey, but put them on terrain that was rougher, less traveled, and considerably less convenient for anyone trying to get ahead of them on a known trail. Caleb set the pace, and Evelyn matched it, and they rode mostly in silence, the way they had learned to, a silence that was not uncomfortable, but occupied both of them, turning over the same questions from different angles. They were 3 hours out of Millhaven, climbing through the rougher northern approach, when Caleb pulled up abruptly. Look at the smoke, he said. She followed his gaze. To the southwest, the direction of Red Willow Creek, there was a thin column of smoke rising against the afternoon sky. Too consistent for a cooking fire. Too large for a brush clearing. Something was burning. How far, she said, though she already knew. 2 hours. He was already moving. Maybe less if we cut across the ridge. The ridge crossing is dangerous in summer. I know. He looked at her. Your call. She looked at the smoke. She thought about her store, her father's corner lot, the land her father had spent 5 years protecting. She thought about Mrs. Delacroix's niece, who was alone in that store right now with 3 weeks of operating instructions and no idea what was heading toward Red Willow Creek. "The ridge," she said. They rode hard. The ridge crossing was everything it had been advertised as: loose rock and steep angles, and the particular concentrated focus of 2 people and 2 horses working through terrain that demanded their complete attention. There was no conversation. There was only the work of it, the physical negotiation of difficult ground. And Evelyn found a strange clarity in it, the way all the complicated things fell away when the immediate problem was just get across this safely and don't fall. They came down the western side as the sun was getting low, and the smoke ahead of them had thickened into something darker and more serious. It was not the store. She saw that as soon as they cleared the last rise, the store was standing its familiar corner lot, intact, no fire visible near it. The smoke was coming from the north end of town, from the direction of Martin Sloane's property. She felt relief and guilt simultaneously, the specific combination of a person who has been spared while someone else was not. They rode in at speed and found Red Willow Creek in a state of organized chaos. People moving, voices raised, a bucket line stretching from the well toward the north end. Caleb spotted Cord Delacroix at the edge of the crowd and pulled up beside him. "What happened?" he said. Cord turned. His expression when he saw Evelyn was complicated relief and something urgent underneath it. "Sloane's barn," he said. "Went up about 2 hours ago. Martin got the animals out, nobody hurt, but it's gone." He looked between them. "It started the same night you 2 left town. Carney came through the next morning asking questions about where you'd gone. By noon, Yates was at the north end watching the road." "And nobody told them anything," Evelyn said. "Told them you'd gone to visit your aunt in Cedar Junction." Cord's jaw worked. "Bought you maybe a day before they figured it out." It was enough. She looked at him steadily. "Cord, did my father talk to you about what was on our land?" The big man was quiet for a moment. "He talked to me, year before he died." He met her eyes. "He told me enough." "Then you know why Graves wants it." "I do." "And you know that we filed the documentation in Millhaven this morning." Something moved in Cord's face. "It's in the record. Official. Receipted. Under protection." She watched the change in him, the shift from a man carrying something heavy alone to a man who has been told the weight is now distributed. "The territorial office already had a preliminary file on Graves. What my father compiled was the connecting evidence. This is going to a court, Cord, a real one, but I need witnesses." She looked at him. "I need Martin Sloane, and I need to know if the Teller widow will come forward." "You get Martin's barn rebuilt," Cord said, "and he'll walk to the Capitol barefooted to testify." He turned and looked at the smoke to the north. "As for Mrs. Teller, she's been waiting 6 years for someone to ask her." The next 2 hours were the kind that tested what people were actually made of. Evelyn moved through Red Willow Creek with the documents from Millhaven in her coat pocket and the specific focused energy of a woman who has been waiting to act and has finally been handed the moment. She spoke to Martin Sloane, who was standing in front of his burned barn with the eyes of a man who has seen what he expected to see coming and is past being shocked by it, and who listened to what she told him with a stillness that cracked at precisely one moment, when she said, "Your name is in my father's documentation," and something moved across his face that looked like a man who has been invisible for 6 years, suddenly becoming visible. "He kept records of all of it," Sloane said. "Every transaction, every crisis, every name." She held his gaze. "He believed you and the others deserved to have someone witness what happened to you, even if he couldn't fix it in time." Sloane looked at his barn. Then he looked at her. "Tell me what you need," he said. She was coming back through the main street when Davis Carnes stepped out of the space between the hardware store and the feed merchant and stood in the path in front of her. She stopped. Caleb was 10 feet behind her. She heard his boots halt. Carney looked at her with the particular expression of a man who is delivering a message and has been told to make sure it lands. "Mr. Graves would like to speak with you," he said. "He suggests tomorrow morning. He says there's no reason this matter can't be resolved quietly between people of good faith." "Quietly," she said. "He's a reasonable man, Miss Carter. He understands that there may have been miscommunications. He's prepared to discuss fair compensation for my land," she said. "That's what you mean. For any inconvenience, Mr. Carn." She took one step toward him and watched him almost step back. You can tell Nathaniel Graves that the time for quiet resolution was 3 weeks ago when his legal representative contacted this territorial office without notifying me. That time is past. She held his eyes. "What I filed in Millhaven this morning is under official protection. The commissioner's office has been notified, and every man and woman in this valley who Graves has wronged over the past 6 years is going to have the opportunity to say so in front of a territorial court." She paused. "Tell him that." Carney's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did something small and rapid and calculating. "He won't take this well," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't imagine he will." She walked past him. Behind her, she heard Caleb's boots resume steady and unhurried 2 steps behind hers. They did not speak until they were inside the store with the door locked. Mrs. Delacroix's niece, a composed young woman named Petra, who had clearly dealt with some version of chaos over the past 2 days and was handling it with admirable calm, had left a note on the counter with the current inventory status and gone home for the evening. Evelyn set her saddlebag down and stood in the middle of the store. Everything looked the same. The shelves, the counter, the ledger in its place by the cash box, the peg where she hung her apron. The ordinary architecture of the life she had been building for 14 months unchanged and precisely where she had left it. She had been afraid on the ridge crossing and during the hard ride down from the northern approach that she was going to come home to ashes. The fact that it was standing all of it intact produced a feeling that was too large for the room she was standing in and that she did not have words for. "He went for Sloane first," she said. "Not the store. Sloane's a witness," Caleb said. "He's been a witness for years. Burning the barn was a message to him and to anyone else watching. This is what happens when you stand up." "It didn't work," she said. "No." Caleb agreed. "It didn't." She turned to look at him. He was standing near the door hat in his hand, and he looked like a man who had spent the last 36 hours moving hard through difficult terrain on not enough sleep, which was exactly what he was. "You should stay here tonight," she said. "It's not safe for you to ride back to wherever you've been camping." "I've been camping at the North Pass," he said, 2 miles out." "I know." She looked at him. "There's a back room with a cot. It's more practical for you to be here in the event that Graves decides not to wait for a court date." He looked at her for a moment. "Is that the only reason?" he said. Not provocatively, just directly in the way he asked everything. She met his eyes and gave him the honest answer which cost her something, because honest answers always did. "No," she said. "It's not the only reason." Something in Caleb Whitmore's expression shifted, not dramatically, not into anything she could have described precisely, but it shifted like a door that has been closed a long time and has just been left quietly unlocked. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. Outside, the summer dark had settled fully over Red Willow Creek, and somewhere across the valley, Nathaniel Graves was receiving the message she had sent back with Davis Carn, and whatever he felt when he heard it, anger, calculation, desperation, all three, he was turning it into his next move. The documentation was safe. The witnesses were found. The case her father had spent 5 years building was now in the hands of people with the authority to act on it. But Graves had 6 years of practice at making problems disappear, and the night was long, and Martin Sloane's barn was still smoldering in the dark at the north end of town, a reminder of exactly what kind of man they were dealing with and exactly how far he was willing to go. Evelyn locked the front door of the store and went to check the back windows. She did not intend to be caught unprepared. Not tonight. Not in her father's store. Not on her father's land. Not ever again. She didn't sleep. She tried stretched out on the narrow cot in the store's back room with her boots still on and her father's letter folded inside her coat. But sleep wouldn't come, and after an hour she stopped fighting it and sat up and listened to the night instead. The store made its familiar sounds around her, the settle of old wood, the creak of the sign above the door in the faint summer wind, the distant call of something moving on the mountain slope above town. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. She cataloged them the way her father had taught her to catalog inventory systematically, without rushing, making sure she knew what was there, so she'd recognize immediately when something wasn't. At some point past midnight, she heard Caleb move in the front room. Not alarm, just the specific sound of a man shifting position, resettling against the wall. He'd put his back to the small adjustments of someone maintaining a watch. She had told him to sleep. He had said he would. Neither of them had believed it. She got up and went to the doorway. He was sitting with his back to the counter facing the door, his pistol on the floor beside his right hand. He looked at her when she appeared and did not seem surprised. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you," she said. "How long have you been awake?" "I slept some." "You didn't." "About 40 minutes," he admitted. She went and sat down on the other side of the counter, her back to the shelves facing the same direction he was facing. For a while they just sat in the dark of the store together, listening to Red Willow Creek settle through its nighttime quiet. And it was strange, the ordinariness of it. Two people sitting in the dark and watching a door, the most natural and most unusual thing she had done in a very long time. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. "The one above Sentinel Ridge." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." He thought about it. "It's small. About 40 acres of good mountain grass, a creek that runs clean even in drought years. I built the main structure myself about 4 years ago. Took most of a summer." He paused. "It's not much to look at, but it holds up in weather." "You built it alone." "I did most of it, had help from a man named Garrett for the roof framing. He's gone now, moved his family to Oregon." A pause. "It's been just me since then." "Do you like it, the alone part?" He considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything. "I liked it better than the alternative," he said. "Which was being around people who were making me into something I wasn't." He paused. "I grew up in a town not unlike Red Willow Creek. Lots of people with strong opinions about what a young man ought to do and be and want. I left when I was 19 because I needed to find out which of those opinions were actually mine." He looked at the door. The mountain was quieter. It gave me room to think. "And now, after 11 years. He turned his head and looked at her in the dark. "Now," he said, "I think quiet might be something that's possible to have too much of." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the door. "I told myself for 14 months that I preferred it alone," she said. "I told myself the town's opinion didn't matter, and other people's help was just another form of debt, and that everything I needed I could provide for myself." She paused. "I believed most of it." "Most." "Most," she agreed. The night moved around them. She was aware of the warmth of him 6 feet away. The particular quality of his stillness that she had been cataloging since the first afternoon he'd walked into her store. Not the stillness of a man who had nothing going on inside him, but the stillness of a man who had learned to keep what was going on inside him from spilling out unnecessarily. She had learned the same thing. She recognized it the way you recognize a technique you've taught yourself in someone who learned it independently. "Caleb," she said. "Ma'am?" "Don't ma'am me in the middle of the night when we're both sitting on the floor," she said, and he made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but occupied the same neighborhood. "Evelyn," he said. "If Graves comes tonight, if he sends men, I'll hear them before they reach the door. I know you will." She looked at him. "That's not what I was going to say." He waited. "If this goes badly, if the commissioner's office moves too slowly, or Graves finds a way to tie up the documentation, or something goes wrong that we haven't anticipated." She stopped, organized her thoughts. My father spent 5 years building this case, and he didn't live to see it through. I need you to know that even if something happens to me, the copies exist. Kepler has the originals. But I made copies in Millhaven before we left. I gave them to Sheriff Decker. There's a third set in the cash box under the floorboard in the back room. Caleb was very still. When did you make copies? He said. While you were speaking with Sheriff Decker. There was a copying clerk 2 doors down. She met his eyes. I didn't tell you because I didn't know yet how much I trusted you. The silence that followed was careful. And now, he said. Now I'm telling you, she said, which ought to answer the question. Something moved in his expression, the same shift she had seen the night before. The door going from locked to unlocked, and he looked at her for a long moment without speaking. All right, he said. All right, she said. A sound. Both of them heard it at the same moment, not from the front door, but from the side alley, the soft impact of a boot on packed dirt, the particular sound of someone trying to be quiet and mostly succeeding. Caleb was on his feet before she'd finished processing it. She was up half a second behind him, and without discussion, she moved to the right side of the room while he moved left. Both of them placing themselves away from the windows, and she had her hand on the small pistol her father had given her on her 18th birthday, that she had carried in her boot every day for 10 years. The sound came again. Then voices low, 2 of them arguing in a whisper. Then a third voice, louder than it apparently intended to be. I ain't burning a woman's store, Carney. That wasn't the agreement. Silence. Then Karn's voice, tight with anger. You'll do what you're paid to do. I was paid to watch and report. I wasn't paid for arson. The voice was unfamiliar. Not Yates, not anyone she recognized. Sloane's barn was one thing. This is the middle of town. There are people sleeping 40 feet away. Then you'd better move fast and quiet. No. A pause. I said no, the unfamiliar voice repeated. I'm done, Carney. Pay me what you owe me, and I'm riding out. More silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of boots on dirt moving away, one set quick heading north. The defector leaving. Caleb caught her eye across the dark room. He held up 2 fingers, 2 remaining. She nodded. They waited. Carney's voice again very low. Yates. I heard him, Yates said. Flat, effectless as always. We do it anyway. Quick, the side door. Caleb didn't wait. He moved to the front door, unlocked it without a sound, and stepped out onto the boardwalk. Evelyn went to the side window. She heard Caleb's voice from outside, clear. Carrying designed to be heard. Davis Karn, step away from that door. A beat of silence that lasted approximately 1 full second. Then running. 2 sets of boots going different directions. Caleb went right following the faster sound. Evelyn went out the side door and cut left, which brought her into the alley at the same moment that Davis Karn came around the corner at a dead run and nearly collided with her. He pulled up short. She already had the pistol level and steady, and she was looking at him over the barrel with the focused calm of a woman who has made a decision and is completely at peace with it. Don't, she said. He stopped. Yates appeared 2 seconds later coming from the other direction and found Caleb 3 feet behind him with a grip on his collar that left no ambiguity about the situation. They stood in the alley in the summer dark, all 4 of them breathing hard. I want you to think very carefully, Evelyn said to Davis Karn, about the next 30 seconds. Because what happens in the next 30 seconds determines whether you spend the rest of your working life as Nathaniel Graves's problem to manage, or whether you become a cooperative witness in a territorial fraud investigation. She held his eyes. The documentation is already in Millhaven. The commissioner's office has already been notified. Graves is finished, Mr. Karn. The only question is whether you go down with him. Carney was breathing in quick, shallow pulls. She could see the calculation running behind his eyes, the rapid recalibration of a man whose entire professional position has just been described to him as a sinking ship. I want a lawyer, he said. That's a very intelligent response, she said. I'll take that as a yes. Lights were coming on in the buildings around them. The sound of boots on the boardwalk, the town waking up to the noise, people coming to their doors. Within 2 minutes, there were 6 people in the alley, including Cord Delacroix, who appeared with a rifle and took in the situation with one sweep of his eyes and moved to stand beside Evelyn without being asked. The town constable, a man named Webb, who was elderly and slow but thorough, arrived 4 minutes after that and took custody of Karn and Yates with the assistance of Cord and his brother Piet, who materialized from somewhere to the left with the calm efficiency of men who had been expecting something like this and were prepared for it. Caleb came to stand beside Evelyn. "Yates," she said. "Not going anywhere," he said. She looked at the 2 men now in the constable's custody, and she thought about 6 families in 5 years, and a man who had stood beside his daughter's grave without telling her what he was carrying. "We need to get word to Millhaven," she said. "Tonight." "I'll ride," Cord said immediately. "No." She thought quickly. "Send the telegraph from the station. Direct to Kepler's office. Give him Karn's name and tell him we have a witness." She looked at Cord. "Can you do that in the next hour?" "Give me 30 minutes, he said, and was gone. The alley cleared slowly. People asked questions, and she answered the ones she could and deferred the others to morning. Karn and Yates were taken to the constable's holding room, which was more a reinforced back office than a proper jail, but would serve the purpose. Webb, who was slower than Evelyn, would have preferred, but considerably more principled than she had expected, listened to her account of the attempted arson with careful attention, and wrote everything down. Caleb stood slightly behind her the entire time present, without intruding, which she had come to understand was simply how he occupied space. It was past 3 in the morning when the alley was finally quiet, and the lights were going back out, and Red Willow Creek was settling back into its nighttime rhythms, with the particular post-crisis quality of a community that has experienced something and is still deciding what it means. She went back inside the store. She sat down on the stool behind the counter, her stool the one she stood on to reach the high shelves, the one that had been her father's before her, and for the first time in 2 days, she let herself be still without listening for threat. Caleb came in behind her. He stood near the door. "The man who walked away," she said. "The third one. The one who said he wasn't paid for arson." "I heard him. He's going to be important." She looked at Caleb. A man who refused a direct order from Karn and walked away if he'd testify to what Graves's organization asked him to do, that's direct evidence of criminal intent. You'd have to find him first. He said he was riding out. She thought. North was the direction he went. Cedar Junction is north. If he's planning to leave the territory, Cedar Junction is his most likely stop for supplies. She looked at Caleb. "Can you ride at first light?" He looked at her steadily. "You want me to go?" "I want that man's testimony." She met his eyes. "And I trust you to get it." The word trust sat between them in the quiet store with its full weight. "I'll go at first light," he said. "Be careful on the North Pass," she said. "Graves doesn't know yet that Karn and Yates are in custody. He might have more men on the roads." "I know the back way through. Took it when I first came looking for you." He paused. "I'll be careful." She nodded. He picked up his hat from the counter where he'd set it earlier and turned it once in his hands, and she recognized the gesture. By now, it was what he did when he was working through something he hadn't fully resolved yet. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes." "When this is over—" He stopped, started again. "When the commissioner's people come through and the court date is set and all of it is moving the way it needs to move." He looked at her directly with the unguarded precision that was the most specifically him thing about him. "I'd like to stay in Red Willow Creek a while longer, if that's agreeable." She looked at him. "Agreeable is one word for it," she said. He almost smiled. It was a near thing, the corner of his mouth, the slight change in the set of his eyes, but she caught it. "Get some sleep," she said. "You've got a hard ride at first light." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went to the back room. She sat on her stool in the dark store and listened to him settle, and she thought about her father's letter, the part Caleb had quoted to her that night in Millhaven, about her being the strongest person Thomas Carter had ever known. She thought about the word witness, that Caleb had used someone who sees clearly and doesn't flinch. She thought she understood for the first time that those two things were connected. That the strongest people were not the ones who needed no one. They were the ones who knew how to let themselves be seen. She fell asleep on the stool and didn't realize it until the light coming through the front window woke her. Caleb was already gone. There was a note on the counter in a handwriting that was large and careful, the hand of a man who'd learned to write under conditions that didn't allow for elegance, Cedar Junction. Back by nightfall if I find him. Lock the front. She locked the front. The day that followed was the longest of her life, and also among the most productive. The telegraph to Kepler's office had gone out the night before, under Cord's name, and the reply came back by 9 in the morning. A wire from Aldous Kepler himself, which she read standing at the telegraph station with Cord looking over her shoulder. Kepler had been in contact with Commissioner Vance's office. A territorial marshal, not Harlan Briggs. Specifically? Not Harlan Briggs, which she read as Kepler covering himself with some urgency, would be arriving in Red Willow Creek within 48 hours. In the meantime, the custody of Carney and Yates was to be maintained and documented. She was back at the store when the second wire arrived. This one was different. It was from a law office in Millhaven, a firm she didn't recognize, and it was addressed to her by name, and it said, Recarter Land Deed and Associated Water Rights. Our client, Nathaniel Graves, wishes to advise that he is prepared to withdraw all boundary contestations and to formally acknowledge the validity of the original Carter deed in full. Our client requests only that any investigation conducted by the Commissioner's office proceed without criminal charges. Please advise your response at earliest opportunity. She read it twice. Then she walked to the constable's office. Carney was sitting in the back room on a wooden chair looking like a man who had spent the night cataloging the specific ways in which his professional choices had brought him to a wooden chair in a constable's back room. He looked up when she came in. Mr. Graves's lawyer sent me a wire, she said. Something crossed Carn's face. Something fast and then carefully suppressed. He's offering to withdraw the deed challenge, she said, in exchange for the investigation proceeding without criminal charges. Carney said nothing. I want you to understand something, she said. She sat down across from him, which brought them to the same eye level, which was deliberate. I'm not Nathaniel Graves. I don't make agreements that require other people to absorb the consequences of what he did. She held his gaze. He burned Martin Sloan's barn. He had a shooter on a Millhaven rooftop. He sent you to burn my store in the middle of the night while people were sleeping 40 feet away. She paused. I will not trade criminal charges for a deed acknowledgement. My deed was never legitimately in question, and I don't intend to treat it as a bargaining chip. Carney looked at his hands. He'll say it was all me, he said finally. Graves. He'll say I acted independently, that he didn't authorize any of it. I know, she said, which is why I need your testimony before he gets the chance to say that. A long silence. What happens to me if I testify? Carney said. I can't promise you anything, she said. I'm not the territorial court, but a man who cooperates fully with a fraud investigation is in a substantially better position than a man who doesn't. She looked at him. And a man who walked away from burning a woman's store that third man last night, he's going to have things to say too. You're not the only witness to what Graves authorized. The question is whether you're the first one to say it clearly. Carn looked at her for a long moment. He knew about your father's survey, Carn said. Graves. He'd known for 3 years. He told me your father was the only obstacle. After Carter died, he figured the daughter would be easier to move. He paused. He said a woman alone on valuable land was a problem that would resolve itself in time. The words landed with the particular weight of something that has been suspected and is now confirmed. He underestimated her, said a voice from the doorway. Both of them turned. Martin Sloan was standing in the constable's doorway. He was wearing work clothes and his barn smoke smell hadn't fully cleared from them yet. He was looking at Carney with the steady, hard expression of a man who has been waiting 6 years for this specific conversation. "Martin," she started. "I heard enough," Sloane said. He came into the room and sat down in the constable's chair and looked at Carney with the direct, patient gaze of someone who has decided on a course and is not going to be moved from it. "Carney, you remember the summer of '81. You remember who was writing for Graves when my water rights got challenged." Carney was quiet. "I remember," Sloane said. "I remember all of it. I've been remembering it for 3 years, waiting for the moment when remembering it would actually mean something." He looked at Evelyn. "I'll testify. Everything I know. Everything I saw." He looked back at Carney. "And I think you know that what I saw is enough to put Graves in front of a judge regardless of what you say. So the real question is whether you're on the right side of this when the marshal arrives." The room was very quiet for a long moment. "Tell me what you need me to write down," Carney said. By mid-afternoon, she had 3 signed statements, Carney, Sloane's, and the Teller widows, who had come into town by wagon at noon, with the particular self-possessed dignity of a woman who has waited a long time for justice and refuses to be rushed toward it now that it's finally arrived. Eleanor Teller was 62 years old and had the clearest memory of anyone Evelyn had ever met, and absolutely no intention of softening anything she said. "He sent a lawyer to my house 2 days after my husband died," Mrs. Teller said, sitting across the counter from Evelyn in the store with a cup of coffee she'd accepted without ceremony. 2 days. My husband was barely in the ground. The lawyer had papers already drawn up. He said the debt against the property was substantial and that I had a decision to make quickly." She looked at Evelyn over her coffee cup. "The debt was not substantial. My husband and I had paid down most of it the previous year. I found out afterward, much afterward, that the figures the lawyer showed me were not our actual figures. They had been altered." She paused. "I signed because I was grieving and frightened and alone, and I believed what I was told." A pause. "I have not stopped being angry about that for 6 years." "You won't have to be angry about it alone much longer," Evelyn said. Mrs. Teller looked at her. "Your father came to see me," she said. "About 4 years ago. He said he was documenting what had happened to us. He sat in my kitchen for 2 hours and wrote down everything I told him, and then he looked up and said, 'Mrs. Teller, I cannot promise you when, but I promise you that someone will answer for this.'" She set down her coffee. "I believed him. I don't know why, but I believed him. He was an honest man," Evelyn said. "He was," Mrs. Teller agreed. "And so is the man he sent." Evelyn looked up. "That cowboy of yours," Mrs. Teller said, with the comfortable directness of a woman who has decided she can say what she sees. "He came to see me too, month before he found you. Made sure I was all right. Made sure nobody from Graves's outfit had been bothering me." She watched Evelyn's face. "He didn't mention that, did he?" "No," Evelyn said. "He didn't." Mrs. Teller picked up her coffee again. "The good ones never do." Caleb rode back into Red Willow Creek as the sun was going orange in the west. He came in from the north with a second rider beside him, a lean, weathered man in a worn coat who rode like someone who had put significant miles behind him recently and was not entirely certain about the wisdom of stopping. Evelyn came out of the store when she heard the horses. Caleb pulled up in front of her and looked down with the particular expression she had catalogued as his version of "it went well, but I'm not going to make a production of it." "This is Frank Neal," he said. "He's willing to make a statement." Frank Neal looked at her from under the brim of a hat that had seen hard weather. He had the eyes of a man who has spent time doing things he was not proud of and is in the process of making a reckoning with that. "I worked for Graves for 2 years, Neal said. "I'm done working for him, and I'm willing to say in front of whatever court needs to hear it exactly what I was asked to do, and when, and by whom." He paused. "Including last night." "Thank you, Mr. Neal," she said. He nodded once. "I ain't doing it for thanks. I'm doing it because I watched Sloane's barn go up and there were horses in it screaming, and that was when I knew I was done." He looked at Caleb. "Your man here made a reasonable argument." She looked at Caleb. "What argument was that?" she said. Caleb got down from his horse and tied him to the post and looked at her with the unhurried steadiness she had come to trust like ground under her feet. I told him the truth was going to come out regardless, he said. I told him the only thing left to decide was whether he was going to be ahead of it or behind it. He paused. And I told him I'd spent 11 years riding alone because I was afraid of owing something to somebody, and that the day I decided to pay a debt instead was the best decision I ever made. The evening was warm and quiet around them. From somewhere up the mountain, a hawk called and fell silent. She looked at this man, dust-covered, unhurried, who had ridden 2 weeks to find her, and 2 more days to find a witness, and who had never once in the entirety of their acquaintance tried to make himself the center of anything. "You told him that," she said. "I did. And it worked. He's here, isn't he?" She pressed her lips together against something that was trying to be a smile and winning. "Get inside," she said. "Both of you. Cord's wife sent a pot of stew and there's enough for everyone." She turned and went back into the store. Behind her, she heard Caleb say to Frank Neal quietly, "She's always like this." And Frank Neal, after a pause, "She reminds me of my mother." And Caleb with the ghost of something warm in it, "Yeah, me too." She did not turn around, but she felt something settle in her chest, something that had been in motion for days, maybe for months, maybe for 14 months, finally finding its right position, the way a stone settles into the bed of a creek after the current has been running long enough. That evening, 6 people sat in Evelyn Carter's store herself. Caleb Martin Sloan, Eleanor Teller, Frank Neal, and Cord Delacroix, and worked through what needed to be said to the territorial marshal when he arrived. Cord's wife had sent enough food for 10 people, which Cord described as her default setting for any situation involving more than 3 adults. They ate, and they talked, and they planned. And it was the first time in 14 months that the store had held more than 1 or 2 people at a time, and the sound of it voices the occasional rough laugh. The particular rhythm of people working through something real together was the sound that had been missing from the walls for a long time. At one point, Eleanor Teller looked up from the papers spread across the counter and said to no one in particular, Thomas Carter would be very pleased right now. Nobody disagreed. Later, after the others had gone and the store had settled back into its quiet, Evelyn sat at the counter with the lamp burning low and went through the witness statements one more time. She had 4 signed affidavits. She had the original documentation her father had compiled. She had the Millhaven filings officially on record. She had a cooperative witness who had worked directly for Graves for 2 years. She had a territorial marshal arriving in less than 48 hours. And she had Nathaniel Graves's own lawyer's wire sitting in the cash box as evidence that Graves himself knew the case was over. She folded the statements carefully and put them with the others. Caleb was sitting near the window, the same position as the night before, watching the street. He had not said he was keeping watch. He had simply arranged himself where he would be most useful, which was how he did everything. "Caleb," she said. My father's letter." She paused. "You said there was a passage you didn't show me." The silence that followed told her she had read it correctly. "There is," he said. "I'd like to read it." He reached into his coat without hesitation and produced the letter. He had it open already at the relevant passage, which told her he'd read it recently, probably more than once. He held it out. She came around the counter and took it from him and stood close to the lamp to read it. Her father's handwriting, the familiar sloping cursive of a man writing something important. Caleb. The last thing I want to say, and the hardest. I raised my daughter to not need anyone because the world is hard on women who need, and I wanted to protect her from that. I think I did the job too well. She knows how to survive. She has not yet let herself believe that surviving is not the same thing as living. If you stay long enough, and I'm asking you to stay, which I know is more than I have the right to ask, show her the difference. Not by telling her. She won't hear it if you tell her. Just by being a man who stays, that's all. Just stay. She stood very still for a moment. Then she folded the letter and held it. He knew, she said quietly. He was a perceptive man, Caleb said. He arranged all of it. She turned to look at him. He arranged the evidence and the network and the timing and the all of it so that when you came to find me, I would already be in a position where I needed what you had. So that we'd have to work together before I could decide I didn't need you. He gave us a problem to solve together, Caleb said. Yes. And if we'd solved it without... She stopped. Began again. If it had just been about the land and nothing else. It wouldn't have been just about the land, Caleb said. That was never just about the land. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with those steady dark eyes, and there was nothing performed about it. No urgency, no pressure, nothing that felt like anything other than a man who was exactly where he intended to be and was prepared to remain there for whatever length of time was required. She thought about what Mrs. Teller had said. The good ones never do. She crossed the room and sat down beside him, her back to the same wall, looking at the same door. Their shoulders were almost touching, and she did not move away from that. My father was right about one thing, she said. Just one. There was that almost smile again. Among others. She looked at the door. He was right that I know how to survive. I'm very good at it. She paused. I think I might be ready to try the other thing. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Living, he said. Living, she agreed. Outside, Red Willow Creek was dark and quiet. 48 hours from now, a territorial marshal would ride in, and the last phase of what Thomas Carter had spent 5 years building would begin to move through official channels with the slow, inevitable weight of legitimate authority. Nathaniel Graves would face consequences that could not be managed or maneuvered around. The people he had wronged would have their moment in front of a court that would finally be required to hear them. All of that was coming. But tonight the store was quiet, and the lamp was burning low, and two people who had been alone for a long time were sitting with their shoulders almost touching, watching a door and breathing the same air. And for the first time in 14 months, Evelyn Carter did not feel the specific heavy weight of a woman who was carrying everything alone. She felt instead something that she recognized from a long time ago, from before the debts and the ledgers, and the frozen ground and the 14 months of proving something to a town that hadn't asked for the proof, something she had set down so long ago she had almost forgotten what it felt like to hold it. She felt like she was home. The territorial marshal arrived on a Thursday. His name was Holt. Deputy Marshal Randall Holt, out of the commissioner's office in the capital. A lean, sharp-eyed man of about 50 who rode in with 2 deputies and a leather satchel that Evelyn strongly suspected contained more paperwork than weapons. He shook her hand with the directness of someone who had been briefed and had no time for social performance, looked at the 4 signed affidavits she placed in front of him without touching them immediately, and said, "Which one's Carney?" "In the constable's back room," she said. "He's been cooperative." "Good." Holt looked at Caleb. "You're Whitmore." "Yes, sir." "Kepler's wire mentioned you specifically." Holt picked up the affidavits and began reading. "Said you tracked down a secondary witness in Cedar Junction who had direct knowledge of Graves's operational instructions." He looked up. "Frank Neal." "He's at Sloane's place," Caleb said. "Half-mile north. He'll come in when you're ready." Holt nodded once and went back to reading. Evelyn stood on her side of the counter and watched this man go through her father's 5 years of careful work, and she felt something she hadn't expected, a kind of stillness that was different from the concentrated vigilance of the past several days. Something that felt like arrival, like a long journey ending not with drama, but with the quiet, definitive click of a door closing behind you. "Miss Carter," Holt said without looking up from the documents. "Yes?" "Your father communicated with Commissioner Vance's office approximately 14 months ago, 3 weeks before his death." He set the page down and looked at her. He sent a preliminary summary of his documentation and requested that the commissioner be aware of the situation in the Whitmore Valley District. A pause. The commissioner received it. He opened a preliminary file. But without the full documentation, without what's in front of me right now, there wasn't enough to move on. Evelyn was very still. "He wrote to the commissioner," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Before he died?" 3 weeks before." Holt held her gaze with the patient directness of a man who understood the weight of what he was saying. He knew the file existed. He knew the commissioner's office was watching. He sent this documentation to Mr. Whitmore because he wanted it preserved outside official channels until the right moment in case someone in the system had been reached by Graves. He paused. He was being cautious. He was protecting the case, she said. He was protecting you, Holt said. Both. She pressed her hand flat against the counter. One breath. Two. Beside her, Caleb said nothing. He didn't move closer or touch her arm or offer any of the gestures that would have been well-intentioned and wrong. He simply stood at the same distance he always stood, present and steady, and let her have the moment without filling it. What happens now? She said. Now I take formal statements from every witness on your list. I review the land deed filings with Kepler's documentation, and I go have a conversation with Nathaniel Graves. Holt's voice was even and unhurried and carried the specific gravity of legitimate authority. That conversation is going to go one of two ways. Either he cooperates fully with the investigation and accepts the legal consequences, or I arrest him this afternoon and we do it the longer way. He looked at her steadily. Either way, Miss Carter, the outcome for your land is the same. Your deed is valid. Your water rights are valid. Nobody is taking this property. The words were simple. They were official. They were exactly what she had ridden 2.5 days through mountain passes to make happen. She nodded once. Thank you, Marshal. Thank your father, Holt said. He did the work. He gathered his papers and went to find Carney. The next several hours moved with the particular momentum of official process, methodical, thorough, and in its own way, as relentless as anything Graves had thrown at her. Holt was good at his job. He took Carn's statement with a court reporter Evelyn hadn't even noticed arrive, a small efficient woman named Miss Pruitt, who wrote everything down in a hand so fast it was nearly illegible, and filed each page with the precision of someone who understood that the future of the written record depended on her doing her job without error. Martin Sloan came in at 10. Eleanor Teller at 11. Frank Neal rode in from the Sloan property at noon, sat down across from Holt with the careful posture of a man who had made a decision about himself and intended to stand by it, and proceeded to give the most detailed account of Graves's operations that anyone in the room had heard yet. Evelyn sat in the back of the store and listened to all of it. At one point, Cord Delacroix came in, looked at the proceedings, looked at Evelyn, and said quietly, "It's really happening. It's really happening," she said. "Your father—" He stopped. Tried again. "He used to come into my place for coffee some mornings. Last year he was alive. He never said anything directly. But he'd sit and drink his coffee, and he'd look at me sometimes and say, 'Cord, a wrong thing doesn't stay wrong forever if the right people refuse to let it.'" He was quiet for a moment. I always figured he was talking about something general. "He wasn't," she said. "No." Cord agreed. He wasn't. Holt left for Graves's property at 2 in the afternoon with both his deputies and Carn's signed statement in his satchel. He did not ask Evelyn to come, and she did not offer. Whatever happened at the Graves ranch in the next few hours was no longer her to manage. She had done her part of it, and the rest belonged to the mechanisms of law that her father had spent 5 years pointing in the right direction. She went and stood in the back room of the store for a few minutes alone with her hand on the shelf where her father used to keep his ledgers. The shelf was hers now. Her ledgers were on it in her handwriting, in her system. But she could still feel the shape of his presence in the room, the particular quality that certain spaces held when someone important had spent a lot of time in them. "Thank you," she said to the shelf and the room and the man who was no longer in it. "For all of it. Even the parts you should have told me about." Then she went back out front because there was work to do, and she was not the kind of woman who stayed in back rooms. Caleb was behind the counter. She stopped. He had found her apron, the one that hung on the peg, and he had not put it on, but he had found the inventory ledger and was apparently in the process of checking the current stock against it with the methodical attention of a man who has run out of useful things to do and has decided to be useful anyway. She looked at him. "What are you doing?" she said. "You're low on lamp oil," he said without looking up. "And your coffee stock is going to run out in about a week." "I know that. Your nails are miscounted in the ledger. You've got 40 more than what's written here." "I know that, too." She came around behind the counter and looked over his shoulder at the ledger. "My system uses the previous count as a baseline and adjusts at the end of the month." "Ah." He studied the page. "That's a good system." "I know." He looked up at her. They were very close, closer than they'd been in the previous 4 days of riding and running and sitting in the dark together, and she was aware of it in a way that was different from the awareness of the past several days, which had been primarily tactical. This was something else. "You don't have to check my inventory," she said. "I know," he said. "But you've been managing everything for 14 months, and you've had 4 days straight of federal investigation and attempted arson and mountain passes, and it seemed like the kind of thing that might be less useful for me to do right now than going and trying to have a useful feeling somewhere." He set the ledger down. "I'm not good at waiting." "Neither am I," she said. "But I've had more practice at it." "You've had more practice at most things," he said. "That's not a criticism." "I know it isn't." She looked at him. "Caleb, what do you want?" "After this is over, when the marshal is done and the court date is set and Graves is dealt with, what do you actually want?" He looked at her with the directness she had stopped being surprised by and started relying on. "I want to finish the south fence line on my upper 40, he said. "I've been putting it off for 2 years, and I want to pipe that secondary spring your father found, the one that runs year-round. If it's done right, it could water the lower pasture through August." He paused. "And I want to do those things knowing I'm going to ride down from the ridge and come back here when I'm done." "Here," she said. "Here," he confirmed. "If that's still?" "It's still," she said. The bell above the front door jangled. Both of them straightened the moment shifting, and Evelyn moved to the front of the store to find Petra Delacroix, who had materialized at some point during the morning's proceedings, and had been running the customer-facing side of the store with a composure that Evelyn intended to compensate generously, letting in a man she had never seen before. He was older, well-dressed without being ostentatious, and he had the particular bearing of someone who operated at a level where first impressions were a professional tool. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes. My name is Graham. I'm Commissioner Vance's personal aide." He reached into his coat and produced a sealed envelope. "The commissioner asked me to deliver this personally," he said. The man paused, and something in his professional composure softened slightly. "He said to tell you that your father was one of the most principled men he ever corresponded with, and that he was sorry it took this long." She took the envelope. She did not open it immediately. She held it and looked at the commissioner's seal, and thought about her father sitting in this store 14 months ago, 3 weeks before he died, writing a letter to a man he had never met in person, asking him to watch a valley he would not live to see protected. "Tell the commissioner," she said, "that Thomas Carter would have said the same about him." Graham nodded, replaced his hat, and left. She opened the letter at the counter with Caleb standing beside her and read it in the quiet of the late afternoon. Commissioner Vance wrote in the direct, unadorned style of a man who had learned that clarity was a form of respect. He confirmed that Graves was under formal arrest as of 2 hours prior. He confirmed that the documentation filed by Evelyn in Millhaven, combined with the witness affidavits gathered by Marshal Holt, was sufficient for a full territorial court proceeding. He confirmed that the Carter deed and water rights were formally recognized and would not be subject to further challenge. And at the bottom, in what appeared to be his own hand rather than a secretary's, he had written, "Your father told me in his letter that he was doing this for his daughter. He said she would finish it correctly. He was right. V." She folded the letter. "It's done," she said. Caleb said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." She put the letter in the cash box under the counter, not because it needed protecting, but because it belonged with her father's things, and she wanted to know exactly where it was. Then she untied her apron and hung it on the peg and said, "I'm going to close the store." "It's 3 in the afternoon, Caleb said. "I know what time it is." She turned to look at him. "I am going to close the store, and you are going to take me up the mountain trail that goes to your ridge, and I am going to see this spring that my father surveyed and that I have never laid eyes on in my life." She held his gaze. "And then we're going to talk about pipe fencing and water channels, because if we're going to do this right, I want to understand the full scope of the project before I agree to anything." A pause. "Before you agree to anything," he repeated. "I make informed decisions," she said. "You know that about me by now?" "I do," he agreed. "Good." She took her hat from the shelf. "Come on." They rode out of Red Willow Creek in the middle of the afternoon, which was unusual enough that 3 people stopped on the street to watch them go. Cord Delacroix, standing outside the feed merchant, watched them pass and said nothing, but had an expression that suggested he would have things to say later. Petra Delacroix watched from the store window with the frank curiosity of someone who had observed the proceedings of the past 4 days and had formed opinions. Eleanor Teller, who happened to be passing in her wagon, looked at them and then looked at the sky and said to no one in particular, "About time." The trail up to the Sentinel Ridge took 40 minutes at a comfortable pace, and they rode it the way they had learned to ride together, in the easy communicative silence of 2 people who had stopped needing to fill space with words. The afternoon light was the particular gold of late summer, and the air changed quality as they climbed, going cooler and cleaner, and she felt the town fall away behind her in a way that was not escape, but something more like perspective. The secondary spring her father had marked on the survey was a small, clear-running thing tucked against a granite shelf on the upper slope. Caleb dismounted, and she crouched down beside it and put her hand in the water. It was cold. Even in August, even after the dry summer, it was cold and steady and running clear. "Year-round," she said. "Even in the worst drought years," he said. "I checked it in '82 when the creek below dried to a trickle. This was still running." She looked at the rock shelf at the line of the slope, at the way the land fell away below toward the valley floor. She was calculating the grade, the pipe length, the storage capacity that would be necessary, the labor involved. She was doing it automatically, the way she did everything, the numbers assembling themselves in her head without being asked. "This could water 300 acres, she said, "if it was properly developed. That's what your father's survey said." "My father was conservative with his estimates." She stood up. "I think it might be more." She looked at Caleb. "Have you got a pencil?" He looked at her for a second. Then he reached into his coat and produced a pencil stub and a folded piece of paper, which he handed over without comment. She sat on a rock and began writing numbers. He sat on a rock nearby and watched her without speaking, which she appreciated. After about 10 minutes, she looked up and said, "The pipe cost would be significant up front, but the water value over 10 years would cover it 4 times, he said. 5 if we develop the 3rd spring too." She looked at her numbers. "The labor for the initial installation, we'd need help. Cord and his brothers, maybe Sloan if his operation can spare him for a week or 2. "They'd come," he said. She looked at him. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He held her gaze. "They came for you in the alley at 3 in the morning without being asked. I think they'd show up for a water pipe." She looked at her numbers again. Then she folded the paper and put it in her pocket. "You said you wanted to do those things," she said, "knowing you'd ride down and come back." "I did say that. I've been thinking about what that looks like practically." She looked at the spring, at the water moving over rock, at the mountain above them, still holding its summer warmth. "Your ranch is 2 hours from town. That's not a problem for a single person, but it's a long way to go and come back every day if there's a store to run and a water development project. And, Evelyn, and I'm not suggesting anything premature, I'm thinking through the practical. Evelyn." She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the steady patience, not the careful steadiness, something more open than that. Something that looked like a man who has been waiting for the right moment and has recognized it. "I know what you're doing," he said. "You're building the logical framework around the thing you've already decided, because it's easier to arrive at it that way than to say it directly. She opened her mouth, closed it. I do the same thing, he said. I've been doing it for 4 days. He looked at her. So, let me say the direct version, and you can tell me if I've got it wrong. She waited. I don't want to be a man who rides down from a ridge and visits, he said. I've been a man who lives at a distance from things that matter for 11 years, and I'm done with that. He held her gaze with the specific quality of a man who has measured the distance between what he wants and what he's willing to say out loud, and has decided to close it. I want to be here, in Red Willow Creek. At whatever level of here you'll have me, for as long as you'll have me. He paused. I'm not asking you to need me. I know you don't need me. I'm asking you to want me around the way I want you around, because wanting is something different from needing, and it's the part I've been missing for 11 years. The mountain was very quiet around them. She looked at this man who had ridden 2 weeks to find her, and 2 days to find a witness, and had checked her inventory while he waited, and had stood between her and trouble without being asked, and had kept the part of her father's letter that was hardest to give her until she was ready to receive it, and she felt the last wall in her chest, the one she had built brick by brick over 14 months of proving she didn't need anyone come down. Not collapse, not crumble, just come down, deliberately, her own hands. You've got it right, she said. He was still for a moment. All of it, he said. All of it, she said. Something happened in his face. Something that started in his eyes and moved outward, the specific expression of a man who has expected to have to argue for something and has just been told the argument is unnecessary. She stood up and closed the distance between them, which was 4 feet and took approximately 2 seconds, and she looked up at him directly, because he was taller than her, and she was not going to crane her neck or step back or do any of the things that created distance between people, when what she intended was the opposite. My father's letter said to show me the difference between surviving and living, she said. He said not to tell me, just to stay. Yes, Caleb said. His voice was lower now, quieter. You've been doing that, she said. From the first afternoon. I've been trying to. I know. She held his gaze. Caleb, I'm going to say something directly now since we've established that's how we both prefer to operate. All right. I don't fall easily and I don't fall fast and I haven't fallen at all in a very long time. She paused. But I think I'm falling now. And I'd rather say it plainly than build a logical framework around it. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. Then he reached up and touched her face, one hand the back of his fingers against her cheek, a gesture so careful and so entirely without urgency that it communicated more than anything he could have said. So am I, he said. For the record. Good, she said. Then we're on the same page. He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him actually laugh. Not the almost laugh, not the ghost of one, but the real thing, low and surprised and completely unguarded, and it was the best sound she had heard in a long time. Maybe in 4 years, maybe longer. We're always on the same page, he said. We are, she agreed. It's efficient. He kissed her then, and it was as unhurried and as precise as everything else about him, not tentative, but careful, the way you are careful with something you intend to keep. She kissed him back with the particular focused intention of a woman who has decided on something and is fully committed to the decision. The mountain held its summer warmth around them, and the spring ran cold and clear over its rocks, and the valley below was beginning to soften into evening. They rode back to Red Willow Creek in the gold hour before dark, and the town received them the way small towns receive things. They have been watching develop with the satisfaction of people who saw it coming and are pleased to be proven right. Cord Delacroix, still outside the feed merchant, nodded once with the dignity of a man who is refraining from commentary out of respect. Petra, locking up the store, smiled at Evelyn with the transparent delight of someone who is 19 and has not yet learned to conceal her reactions. Eleanor Teller, who was now apparently making a second trip through town for no discernible reason, looked at the two of them and said, Your father would have liked him. I know, Evelyn said. He did like him. Mrs. Teller said. He told me, about a year ago. She clicked her tongue at her horse and moved on. Evelyn looked at Caleb. He told her, she said. Your father liked to be prepared, Caleb said. He liked to arrange things, she said. He did. Caleb looked at her sideways. Are you angry? She thought about it. No, she said, not anymore. The months that followed moved with the pace of real things. Not the rushed momentum of crisis, but the steady daily accumulation of life being lived. Marshal Holt's investigation produced results that surprised even Kepler. In their scope, Graves had been operating a coordinated land acquisition scheme across not one valley, but 3 districts, and the full unraveling of it took 6 months of court proceedings and produced a territorial court ruling that was eventually cited in 2 subsequent fraud cases as precedent. The families who had lost land to Graves's manufactured crises did not all recover what they'd lost. Some of it was gone beyond recovery, sold on and developed. But the financial settlements were real, and the public record was clear. And Martin Sloan, who testified on the 3rd day of proceedings with the quiet, contained precision of a man who has been carrying something for 6 years and is finally setting it down. Shook Evelyn's hand outside the courthouse afterward and said, Your father would have stood right here. He would have, she said. He'd have bought everyone coffee and argued about the judge's tie. Sloan laughed a surprised, genuine sound. He would have. God, he would have. Davis Carn's cooperation resulted in a reduced sentence. He left the territory afterward and was not heard from again. Yates received the full consequence of what the court determined he had earned, which was considerable. Frank Neal, whose testimony about the Sloan barn fire and the Millhaven shooting was among the most damaging evidence presented, was ultimately given immunity in exchange for his full cooperation, and spent the following year, as far as anyone in Red Willow Creek could determine, trying to become a different kind of man than he had been. Evelyn thought about that, sometimes the particular courage of deciding to be different. She understood it more than she would have a year ago. The water development project began in the spring, when the ground was soft enough to work. Caleb had the engineering of it planned out over the winter pipe runs, storage points grade. Calculations worked out on paper at Evelyn's counter on the evenings he wasn't at his Ridge property, packing it up and moving it down to town in stages, which was a process that took 3 months and which Evelyn did not comment on, except to note once that the back room had more room than he might think. He moved into the back room in February. By March, Cord Delacroix had told everyone in town, which meant everyone in town knew by noon of the same day. And the collective response of Red Willow Creek was approximately what you would expect from a community that had watched a woman survive alone for over a year, and was fully prepared to approve of any development that suggested she had stopped doing that. Hester Briggs, who had come into the store the previous year with opinions about young women running businesses without male guidance, came in on a Thursday in March and bought a bolt of muslin and said, with the careful lack of inflection of someone making an overture, "They are not entirely comfortable making. I understand you've had some success with the territorial investigation." "We have," Evelyn said. "It was brave work," Hester said. "Writing to Millhaven alone like that." "I wasn't alone," Evelyn said. Hester looked at the backroom door, through which Caleb's voice could be heard discussing something with Cord about pipe diameter. She looked back at Evelyn. "No," she said. "I suppose you weren't." A pause. "I may have been not entirely accurate last year about the question of what a woman in your situation requires." "You may have been," Evelyn agreed pleasantly. Hester bought her muslin and left, and Evelyn stood at the counter and felt the particular satisfaction of a moment that has arrived at exactly the right time and in exactly the right form. Caleb appeared in the back room doorway. "Was that Hester Briggs?" It was. "What did she want?" "Muslin," Evelyn said. "And to be slightly less wrong than she was before." He considered this. Progress. "Remarkable progress," she agreed. The spring water came online in May, the primary pipe run first, then the secondary branch 2 weeks later. The first time water ran from the pipe into the lower pasture storage tank. Caleb stood and watched it with the specific expression of a man watching something he planned on. Paper become real in the world, and Evelyn stood beside him and felt the number calculations from her paper run a line with the physical reality in front of her. And it was the satisfying convergence of two people who both thought in systems looking at a system that worked. 300 acres, she said. 340 once we get the third run in, he said. My father was conservative. Yes, ma'am. She looked at him. You just mammed me. Old habit. He wasn't even slightly sorry. She let it go on the grounds that she had a lot of things to say to him later, and didn't need to use them all up in the pasture. Martin Sloan came by with his oldest boy to see the water system that afternoon, and 3 neighboring ranch families who had been watching the development with interest rode over to look. And somehow by evening there were 14 people at the Carter property, and Cord's wife had produced food from somewhere, and it had turned into the kind of gathering that Red Willow Creek was good at when it remembered what it was supposed to be. Not a town full of people watching one woman hold herself together, but a community, the actual kind, the kind that shows up. Evelyn sat on the porch steps in the evening and watched the people moving around her yard, and felt something she wanted to name precisely because precision was how she approached things. It was not relief. Relief was about the ending of something bad. This was the beginning of something good, which was different, which required a different word. She decided on belonging. Caleb came and sat beside her on the steps. Cord's wife made pie, he said. I saw. She made 3 of them. He sounded genuinely impressed. Where does she keep finding this capacity? She told me once that feeding people is how she loves them, Evelyn said. She said some people say it with words, and some people say it with pies, and she'd matched her capacity to her method. Caleb thought about this. That's one of the wisest things I've ever heard. She's a wise woman. They sat together on the steps while the summer evening moved around them, and the people of Red Willow Creek ate pie and argued about water pipe grades and told stories and laughed at the wrong moments the way people do when they are genuinely comfortable with each other. I need to tell you something, Caleb said. She looked at him. I came to Red Willow Creek because I owed your father a debt, he said. That was the true version of why I started writing. 11 years of owing a man a debt and finally being in a position to do something about it. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. But somewhere between the first afternoon in your store and the Ridge Trail and Millhaven and 3 signed affidavits, I stopped coming back because of the debt. She waited. I want you to know the difference, he said, between the reason I arrived and the reason I stayed. He met her eyes directly. I stayed because of you. Not the debt, not your father. You. She held his gaze. I know, she said. You know. I've known for a while, she said. I was waiting for you to say it. He looked at her. Why didn't you say it first? Because I wanted to hear you say it, she said. I'm allowed to want things. You're absolutely allowed to want things, he agreed. Good. She held his gaze. Then I want one more thing. What's that? She looked at him in the evening light. This man who had come looking for a debt and had stayed for her, who had stood beside her without standing in front of her, who had watched her clearly and not flinched, who had checked her inventory when he didn't know what else to do with his hands, who had ridden to Cedar Junction to find a witness because she asked him to and had come back the same day. I want to stop calling this temporary, she said. The arrangement, She gestured between them. Whatever careful word we've been using. We haven't been using any word, he said. Exactly, she said. I want to use a word. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. Then he said, What word did you have in mind? She thought about her father's letter. She thought about stay. She thought about the 11 years he had lived on a ridge, learning how to be alone, and the 14 months she had spent in a store below, learning the same thing, and how neither of them had gotten very far with it, because it turned out there were things that solitude could teach you, and things it fundamentally could not. Home, she said. I want to call it home. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's a good word. It's a precise word, she said. "I prefer precise words." "I know you do," he said. And he took her hand, unhurried, deliberate, the way he did everything, and held it in both of his, on the porch step of a house in Red Willow Creek that had been built by a man named Thomas Carter on a corner lot he had chosen with the particular quiet intelligence of someone who was always thinking further ahead than the people around him realized. The evening settled fully into dark. Inside the house, the voices of people who had become neighbors again rather than strangers moved through the rooms that had been too quiet for too long. Outside, the mountains held the last light above the valley, and the water ran clean and steady through the pipes that would feed the lower pasture through every dry summer to come. Two people who had each believed for different reasons and in different ways that they were meant to be alone had found out they were wrong. And in Red Willow Creek, in the summer of 1885, the word they chose for that discovery was the most accurate word available. They called it home, and they built it together, and it held, and it was enough, and it was everything.